Deemed plain and worthless, this girl was sold off by her scumbag father to the tyrannical king. Rumor had it that the king had tormented his first 2 wives to death, and she was the pitiful third bride chosen. To thwart her father's scheme of selling his daughter for glory, she chose to end her life by jumping into the river the day before the wedding. Little did she expect that she had truly died, without any rebirth or grand revenge. Meanwhile, Kang Yijie, another girl, had been deemed cursed from childhood, abandoned by her parents the moment she was born. Her yin-yang eyes, however, allowed her to see things that no ordinary human should ever see. Fortunately, kind-hearted grandmother Youngsun adopted her and strictly warned her never to go near water. Naturally, she understood just how profound that warning truly was. Even if she couldn't escape fate's cruel design, she still resolved to live on resiliently. Thus, she always pretended not to see the spirits lurking around her. Yet shockingly, after falling asleep, she woke up to find she had transmigrated into the body of Lady Haley Duncan. What was more, she came face to face with a man trailing an entire legion of vengeful spirits from hell. To survive, she tried her best to drive away the vengeful spirits endlessly tormenting the king. Little did she know, as the king regained his sanity, genuine love began to blossom between them in this marriage of convenience. However, at their very first encounter, the man stood before her with an expression looking ready to send her straight to the executioner. At that moment, having just transmigrated into Haley's body and barely conscious, she was subjected to a frantic, vicious beating. "Haley, how dare you jump into the river right before the wedding day? You've ruined our family's grand ambition." Though her battered body ached terribly, what drove her to even greater despair was how completely unfamiliar everything was. Who was Haley? What was this strange place she had never seen before? And just who was this man beating her? Recalling her unique ability to see spirits, she wondered if she had been possessed by someone named Haley. So she began calling Haley's name inside her mind, hoping she could help her escape. Yet no matter how long she called, she felt not the slightest response from within this body. Just as panic began to set in, Haley's memories suddenly flooded into her mind. It turned out she wasn't possessed by Haley. She had transmigrated into the corpse of a deceased woman. According to the memories she had just unlocked, the previous owner of this body truly had jumped into the river. And the man currently beating her was none other than Haley's father, Duke Albert Duncan. Seemingly hating Haley to the bone, he slapped her relentlessly left and right, raining brutal blows down on her delicate face. Right at that moment, a mocking voice rang out. "Is this how the Duke educates his people?" Hearing this, Duke Duncan's striking hand froze instantly. "Get out. I have something to discuss with my fiancé." His gaze was razor-sharp, making everyone present dare not look directly at him. Drawing from Haley's memories, she realized the overwhelming man before her was her fiancé, the king of this realm. Though he appeared terrifying, what truly horrified her was the countless vengeful spirits behind him. Just what had he done to be surrounded by so many wraiths? She had never witnessed such a gruesome sight, trembling uncontrollably in terror, prompting the man to ask why she was shaking so much. Seeing so many wraiths, it was already a miracle she hadn't wet herself in sheer fright. Naturally, the man had no idea what was on her mind, assuming she feared execution. "Though you've committed a capital crime, I didn't come here to punish you." These words didn't ease Yijai's fear in the slightest, only making her tense up even more. Hearing this, she bowed her head even lower, her heart pounding frantically. To her surprise, the man let out a low chuckle at the sight of her shivering frame. "Do you despise this marriage so much? So much that you wouldn't hesitate to throw your life away?" Yet wasn't this marriage proposal initiated by the Duncan family itself? Answer me. I don't like asking the same question twice. His entire being radiated a perilous, tyrannical aura. Yijie felt both indignant and terrified. She wasn't the real Haley and had no clue what had transpired. Furthermore, Haley's memories were incomplete, but preserving her life mattered most. So she answered cautiously, I didn't do it because I hated this marriage." "So there's another man you can't forget?" Hearing this startling conclusion, Yijie was stunned. Though she herself had never experienced romance, Haley might indeed have harbored someone in her heart. Seeing her hesitate, the man seemed to have found his answer. Yet to him, whether Haley had someone she couldn't forget was entirely irrelevant. What he cared about was not going down in history as an ill-fated, cursed king. Since his first 2 queens had suffered untimely deaths, his 3rd queen absolutely could not die right now. Even if she wished to die, she had to wear the crown first. The man gripped her chin firmly, forcing her to look straight at him. "So do you refuse, or will you choose to wear the crown?" Overwhelmed by the massive shock, Yijie was unable to respond for a long moment. Could a simple village girl like her truly become the consort of a king? And why were the ghosts behind him staring so intently at her as well? Could it be that they too were waiting for her answer? Unable to look directly at them, she hurriedly turned her gaze back to the man. "What happens if I refuse?" The man answered patiently. "If you don't refuse, we'll simply tell the public the bride caught a cold, delaying the wedding. But if you refuse, then you must say goodbye to this life." Yijay was so infuriated that she began hiccuping uncontrollably. What kind of unfair ultimatum is this? So refusing to marry means immediate death? She wanted to live, there was no need to deliberate any further. She immediately patted her chest and gave the man her assurance, though he still looked unconvinced. Reflecting on it, the words of someone who jumped into a river to commit suicide yesterday were indeed hardly credible. The man seemed to see right through her thoughts, yet chose not to press further. He directly summoned Duke Duncan into the room. Duke Duncan bowed his head with the utmost deference. "Your Majesty, you summoned me." Yet internally, he was gnashing his teeth in silent rage. "This damn bastard dares to act like the master inside my own estate!" Naturally, the man didn't spare a glance for someone of his sort. He arrogantly warned Duke Duncan. "As you wished, your daughter will soon become the queen of this realm. If you dare treat her as you just did again, don't even dream of keeping your life." The moment he finished speaking, the aura around the man turned ominously sinister. The girl shivered, glancing behind him. Those vengeful spirits were actually bewitching him to swallow. Such dark power was beyond human endurance, and he might truly end Duke Duncan's life right then and there. Damn it, that feeling of losing control is returning. Realizing he was about to lose control, the man forced himself to steady his mind, using his formidable willpower to suppress the urge. Witnessing this, Yijay gasped, covering her mouth in disbelief. Most ordinary people would have succumbed to madness under such circumstances, yet he managed to suppress it through sheer inner strength. Having regained control of his body, the man stepped forward to Yijay, pulled her up, and he gently kissed her fingertips with an amused smile. "The wedding will be held in 4 days. Understood, my love?" Yijay gritted her teeth and agreed. Hearing the answer he desired, the man pulled Yijay into a tight embrace. Those casual words felt as though they had sealed her destiny forever. The man turned to look at Duke Duncan, who was standing aside with a deferential posture, and delivered a cold warning. "Things have escalated this far, there can be no further delay. 4 days is my final leniency toward your Duncan family. Furthermore, you are forbidden from laying a hand on the future queen." With that, he turned back to Yijay and smiled. "Please stay alive to walk beside me." Watching his departing figure, Yijay felt completely lost and bewildered. The man has just gone out, his name is Roderick Ferris Blake, and he's the king of Cayenne. How on earth did she end up becoming the queen of a tyrant king? This King Ferris, weighed down by such immense resentment and karmic curses, how had he survived until now? 4 days passed in the blink of an eye, and the wedding day arrived. Hearing the whispers of the crowd, Yijay realized this political marriage was far more complicated than she had imagined. Though this man was the supreme ruler of the kingdom, no woman dared marry him, for anyone who did met a tragic demise. The first bride died in an accident, the second drank poison to commit suicide, and the third threw herself into a river. Yet in the eyes of the world, the third bride had successfully married the king. Only she knew that the third bride was no longer the original owner of this body, but herself, someone who had seen ghosts since childhood. At that moment, King Ferris, clad in splendid white ceremonial attire, walked straight toward her. Yijay was stunned to discover that there were no vengeful spirits behind him at all. There had clearly been so many before. Just what was going on? Looking closely, however, he was undeniably handsome. Perhaps her stare was a bit too intense. Ferris quickly caught on and demanded to know what she was staring at. Guiltily looking away, Yijay claimed she was merely too nervous. "No, you don't look nervous at all." Hearing that, Yijay shuddered and blurted out, "If your Majesty can even tell whether I'm nervous or not, then—" Catching herself, she slapped a hand over her mouth. "Damn it, I walked right into his trap again." Yet Ferris found her reaction thoroughly amusing. To steady her nerves, Yijay composed herself and decided to be somewhat honest with Ferris. "Your Majesty is a noble sovereign, while I know nothing about you. Naturally, I must be cautious." Having spoken, she stole a quick glance at Ferris. Had she been too blunt? To her surprise, Ferris seemed to appreciate her candor. As time passed, a guard approached to announce it was time for the newlyweds to enter the hall. Yijay had no choice but to take Ferris's arm, walking alongside him into the tomb of marriage. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept up as a white-haired boy riding a white horse appeared in midair, glaring in fury. Sensing this strange aura, Yijay was utterly astonished. The white-haired boy was actually a spirit. This was the first time she had ever sensed such a powerful spirit. Just then, as if sensing something, the spirit's sharp gaze swept downward. Yijay immediately lowered her head, avoiding making eye contact with him. If he realized she could see spirits, she would be in serious trouble. Beside her, Ferris noticed her secretive glance. "What are you doing now?" EJ immediately apologized, replying that it was nothing. She never imagined this world would be so strange and terrifying. Not only were there swarms of vengeful wraiths, but also extraordinarily powerful spirits. It seemed she had to act with extreme caution from now on. Once the wedding concluded, EJ hurried back to her chambers to await further instructions. Meanwhile, His Majesty was sharing drinks with Commander Jade of the Royal Knights. It turned out they had been secretly investigating the deaths of his two previous fiancés. Commander Jade suspected Duke Duncan was the culprit behind the scenes. Had the previous brides not been murdered, a powerful maternal clan like the Duncans would never have gained such leverage. Previously, Ferris's sole criterion for choosing a queen was a powerless noble house with no political ambitions. He refused to allow maternal relatives to manipulate royal court affairs. Yet now that Duncan blatantly pushed for an alliance with the royal family, he was indeed the prime suspect. The only unexpected variable was that Duncan's daughter Haley had jumped into the river by herself. Though she survived, Ferris believed she genuinely had no ambition to become queen. Of course, that didn't clear the Duncan family of suspicion, so he ordered Commander Jade to keep a close watch on them. Perhaps Haley could serve as a useful pawn in dealing with House Duncan. Seeing Ferris drinking heavily with no intention of stopping, Commander Jade couldn't help but advise, "Your Majesty, tonight is your wedding night. Please don't be too cruel to the Queen." From another perspective, Her Majesty is quite pitiful as well. Ferris, however, countered that such remarks were unbecoming of the Knight Commander, telling him to focus on monitoring House Duncan instead. With that, he set down his wine goblet and strode toward Haley's bedchamber. Noticing His Majesty seemed in remarkably good spirits today, Commander Jade wondered if his bouts of madness had finally subsided. In truth, the king suffered from severe nervous exhaustion and chronic insomnia, unable to get a restful night's sleep for ages. If only he could maintain today's calm state, how wonderful that would be. Yet halfway there, Ferris suddenly felt a piercing, agonizing headache. He was clearly fine today, so why was his head suddenly throbbing as if ready to explode? At this time, EJ was fretting over whether her nightgown was too revealing. Even in her past life, she had never experienced a wedding night. Though not averse to physical intimacy, the thought still made her somewhat apprehensive. Just as she mustered her courage, Ferris abruptly appeared before her. His entire body was engulfed in the dark yin energy of vengeful wraiths. This truly startled EJ. He was fine during the day. Even if he had visited a graveyard, it couldn't possibly be this severe. Ferris was in such excruciating pain that he could barely control his body, stumbling before collapsing onto the bed. Seeing this, Haley felt conflicted, but with the ghostly shrieks echoing louder in her ears, she couldn't just stand by. So she shook Ferris vigorously, hoping he would regain his senses. But he only stirred briefly before slipping back into delirium. Haley knew he could still hear her voice, so she continued shaking him firmly. "You must hold on." To her dismay, Ferris suddenly passed out from the excruciating pain. He was clearly tormented by vengeful spirits, yet why did his body emanate a divine spiritual aura? Though unsure of what was happening, she couldn't bear to let the wraiths torment Ferris any longer. Grandmother Yongsun had once warned her that meddling with the spirit world would only make her fate more turbulent. Yet remembering how Ferris had stopped Duncan's brutal beating, she felt compelled to lend a hand just this once. Thus, she immediately cast the shamanic art taught by Grandmother Yongsun. To her alarm, the vengeful wraiths instantly realized she could see them. Seeing this, Yijai decisively tore a piece of cloth from her gown, bit her fingertip until he had some red ink, and drew a talisman charm. Though unsure if it would work, confronting evil spirits required an utterly fearless resolve. Departed souls, the realm of the living and the realm of the dead do not align. The worlds of the living and the dead can never intertwine. You who defy the natural order, return at once to where you belong. As her incantation fell, crackling sparks burst forth continuously. Watching the vengeful spirits vanish one by one, Haley knew she had succeeded, but the spiritual backlash left her dizzy and exhausted. Even if she couldn't eradicate them permanently, she had at least driven them away for now. To prevent the wraiths from returning, she tucked the talisman beneath the bed. Stumbling back, Haley murmured softly, "Ferris, you can finally sleep peacefully tonight. As for the debt I owe you, consider it repaid." With those final words, her exhausted body collapsed right beside Ferris. The next morning arrived in a flash, and as she opened her drowsy eyes, a voice resonated above her. "Haley, you're awake." Hearing that, she bolted upright and sat cross-legged. What's going on?" Ferris pointed down at her leg, which was still resting squarely across his body. EJ hastily pulled her leg back, frantically racking her brain to remember when they had become so intimate. With her face flushed crimson and her heart pounding wildly, she stammered that nothing had happened. Amused by her endearing reaction, Ferris smirked and said nonchalantly, "I'm not complaining, but if it wasn't me, could there be someone else in this room?" His sudden retort left her completely at a loss for words. Could she really tell him that his back was crawling with vengeful spirits? So she mumbled softly, I just touched you by accident." Ferris didn't buy it, though his memories of last night were a total blur. He had expected to spiral into uncontrollable madness, yet astonishingly, his mind felt exceptionally clear. And this newfound clarity had begun the moment Haley arrived. Recalling her cute reaction, a slight smile touched Ferris's lips, only to be quickly suppressed. Following that chaotic wedding night, Yi-jae didn't see Ferris for several days. She hadn't expected his gratitude to begin with, yet she still felt a twinge of disappointment. However, now was not the time to dwell on such trivial matters. The urgent priority was to craft truly potent talisman charms. It turned out that after that exorcism night, the wraiths hadn't let her off, relentlessly stalking her. "Death is your destiny! Ferris will pick your head out of your body!" The relentless chanting of the disturbing spirits drove Yi-jae to immediately burn talismans to ward them off. She had already reborn once, was she going to burn again so soon? Had she known, she would have heeded grandmother Youngsan's warning, but regret was useless now. Survival was paramount. She set to work erecting a protective ward, concealing talisman charms in every corner of the room. Suddenly, she heard faint, soft sobs. The sound instantly caught her attention, prompting her to follow the noise to its source. Could there still be a lingering wraith that hadn't been banished? Yet she couldn't sense any malicious chi whatsoever. As the sound grew clearer, she drew back the window curtain to find a tiny spirit clinging to the table, trembling all over. Realizing it was not an evil spirit, the kind-hearted girl comforted it. "Don't cry. I'm holding a talisman, but I'm not here to harm you." The tiny spirit shivered slightly, yet summoned the courage to ask, "What is your name?" "I'm Yi-jae." This was the first time since arriving in this world that she spoke her true name aloud. That surreal sensation made her heart flutter. She asked in return, "And what is your name?" The tiny spirit shook its head. "I have no name, because you're the first person who has ever seen me." "Yi-jae, I'm so scared." Yi-jae looked at it and asked gently, "What are you afraid of? Is it me, or what I'm holding in my hand?" Her eyes scanned the room, finally resting on a cracked antique box tucked in the corner. With just one glance, she could tell this box was well over a century old. Typically, such antique objects give birth to spiritual entities. Perhaps this tiny spirit was the fairy of the antique box. It seemed because the box was damaged, it had inadvertently revealed itself, unable to use its powers. Yi-jae felt apologetic. "I'm sorry, I don't have the skill to repair this." Hearing this, the little fairy began to sob, desperately hoping she could help. "Though I can't fix it, I can help keep evil chi from entering this room, so you won't be scared anymore, right?" The little fairy squealed with delight. "But could you place a talisman inside the box?" Afraid she might refuse, the little fairy spun and hopped around her, chanting repeatedly, "Please put one in, pretty please." Yi-jae sighed in amusement, teasing that a shameless fairy like this must be at least 300 years old. Teasing aside, the girl ultimately agreed to the spirit's request. Yi-jae carefully placed the talisman inside the box and closed the lid. "There, is that good?" Seeing this, the little fairy danced with uncontrollable joy. Watching its silly, ecstatic dance, she caught the little fairy's cheerful mood and laughed along. This was also the first time since her rebirth that she had laughed so wholeheartedly. Yet her joy was short-lived. Having exhausted too much spiritual energy while crafting talismans, she fell ill. However, to make this place truly safe, what she had done was still far from enough. With this thought, she slowly got up, deciding she needed to carve a totem for her room. Though she already possessed a string of spirit beads, its craftsmanship was too crude, so she dragged her weary body to begin wood carving. "What are you doing?" The voice booming out of nowhere startled Yi-jae, causing the block of wood to slip from her hands and drop to the floor. "Your Majesty, why did you appear so suddenly?" The girl couldn't help but grumble. "The head maid told me you were unwell, so I brought some medicine for you." Just as Yi-jae was about to express her thanks, the vengeful wraiths outside the door gave her a fright. Though ferocious, they were unable to breach the ward. It seemed her barrier was working. She needed to finish the totem pole as quickly as possible. Before she could pick up the wood, Ferris swiftly grabbed it first. Taking in the suggestive shape of the carved wood, both froze in silence. The maid suddenly had an improper thought, her face turning bright red. Rumor had it nothing happened on their first night. Could she be planning to use that instead? Good heavens, how utterly scandalous! Ferris didn't overthink it, but instead confiscated all the carving tools from Yi-jae's hands. Seeing even her carving knife taken away by Ferris, Yi-jae panicked immediately. She still had to finish making the Jangsung Guardian Totem. Not long ago you jumped into the river and now you're holding a knife. As your husband, how could I turn a blind eye? With that, Ferris took the knife and walked away. Fortunately, he had come to check on her after hearing the Knight Commander's report. Haley's behavior was indeed rather bizarre. Yet he had no idea her strange actions were all aimed at purging the vengeful spirits haunting him. Deprived of all her tools, Yijai could only sulk in bed. Just a few more days were needed to complete the totem pole, but now she had nothing left to work with. Just then, she remembered the diary of Haley, the original owner of this body. So she opened it and began reading page by page. Initially, she merely wanted to recover memories she couldn't quite recall. Yet in the diary, Haley's life seemed perpetually carefree and tranquil. Suddenly, a knock sounded at the door. "Your Majesty, your maiden family has sent a letter and medicine." The girl replied that she was feeling fine and didn't need the medicine for now, but she still needed to review the letter. Duke Duncan sending a letter certainly boded nothing good. Just as she expected, inquiring about her health was merely a pretext. His real goal was planting Duke's men inside the Imperial Palace. Not knowing how to reply to Duke Duncan, she decided to seek Ferris's opinion on the matter. In the audience hall, listening to irritating reports, Ferris was in a foul mood. The vengeful spirits haunting him seized the opportunity to frenzy around him. The killing intent around Ferris surged wildly, as if he might draw his blade and slaughter someone at any moment. The officials below were terrorized into dead silence, while Commander Jade standing nearby was on high alert, ready to step in and restrain him. Ever since ascending the throne 3 years ago, Ferris's tyrannical reputation had grown increasingly terrifying. Despite the Knight Commander's repeated dissuasions, he would still draw blood over trivial matters. He used to be an open-hearted, vibrant young man, yet now he had transformed into a completely different person. Just as Yijai arrived to seek his counsel and witness this tense chaos, the maid beside her whispered, "We'd better head back." Haley immediately turned to leave, but seeing King Ferris, bewitched by vengeful spirits and on the verge of total collapse, she halted. She couldn't simply ignore him, wondering why Ferris's condition had deteriorated so severely. Suddenly, Ferris lost control and drew his blade. Seeing this, Commander Jade was about to charge forward. But Yijai was one step faster. Braving the danger, she tightly gripped Ferris's arm as he drew his sword. "Your Majesty." The shocking sight left everyone in the room utterly stunned. Trembling, she called out once more, "Your Majesty!" The vengeful spirits inciting Ferris to slaughter instantly recoiled the moment Yijai embraced him. The murderous frenzy in his eyes gradually faded away. Ferris stood frozen in disbelief, astonished that Haley could restore his sanity. He was the craziest villain in the entire story, yet he had been conquered by this girl, turning into an arrogant man who now clung to her every single day. Cold and ruthless on the outside, yet surprisingly clingy and endearing before her. Back then, however, he still maintained his haughty facade until she pulled him back from the brink of madness. The moment he regained his senses, he glanced down at the girl clutching his arm, then turned toward the ministers who were struck dead silent. Awkwardly pulling his arm away, he demanded with an arrogant look, "What is the matter?" Yijai thought to herself, "Just whose fault do you think this mess was anyway?" But unexpectedly, his gaze locked onto her, wearing an expression that seemed to say, "Don't make me ask a second time." This made her hesitate. She had originally come to discuss replying to Duke Duncan, but considering their bitter feud, bringing him up would surely trigger his dark emotions. If the vengeful spirit seized that chance to invade his mind again, wouldn't her earlier heroic rescue be completely in vain? "I came to invite your Majesty for tea, but it seems my timing was poor." The two went on conversing as if no one else were in the room. Yet the king clearly didn't buy her excuse, leaving the ministers below too terrified to even breathe. Flustered and unsure how to make her lie believable, she could only shoot a pleading look at her maid. Catching the signal, the maid broke into a cold sweat and hurriedly jumped in to back up her story. Surprisingly, Ferris readily accepted the tea invitation. Soon enough, the maid had the tea prepared and served. Yijai awkwardly took a sip, at a loss for words while finding the tea rather unpalatable. "Haley, what are you thinking about? Besides, you're the one who dislikes tea, not me." Exposed, cold sweat broke out across Yijai's forehead, yet she desperately tried to maintain her composure. The king suddenly chuckled, and seeing him now, she realized he wasn't inherently cruel by nature, nor did he dislike lighthearted banter. His violent outbursts and loss of control were entirely caused by the vengeful spirits haunting him. Yet to her dismay, the moment she shifted slightly away, the swarm of wraiths swarmed right back toward him. Unable to ignore his pained, restless expression, she stood up and walked closer to him. "Have you not been sleeping well? Do I look like it?" The king looked utterly exhausted. Nodding softly, she flicked her wrist, channeling the power of her spirit beads to strike at the wraiths. Taking a deep breath, she sat down beside him and gently took his hand. Watching this, Commander Jade froze in terror, worried His Majesty might lose control once more. After all, everyone knew their relationship was frosty, yet surprisingly she began massaging his hand. Ferris asked in confusion, "What are you doing? Helping me sleep better?" "I used to suffer from insomnia myself." Her earnest reply only earned a light scoff from him. He thought to himself that she wasn't even bothering to hide her clumsy lies anymore. Massaging him for a while, she realized the spirits had plagued him for so long that his internal chi had become completely blocked. After all, no one understood the flow of spiritual energy better than she did. Back then, anyone seeking shamanic aid from Grandmother Youngsun had to have their chi regulated by Yijie first. Moreover, King Ferris possessed immensely potent spiritual energy, making any blockage far more dangerous. But he didn't seem like an evil person at all, so why did he attract so many vengeful spirits? At this moment, she continued channeling chi to unblock his energy meridians. As she reached the final meridian, the king's face tightened, clearly feeling a jolt of pain. "Flow smoothly now." As soon as she spoke, a soothing warmth spread throughout his body. But in the next second, all his strength vanished, and he collapsed onto her. To save the ghost-plagued king, Yijie had stopped concealing her spiritual abilities. She had only unblocked his meridians, yet he had unexpectedly fallen into a deep sleep. Feeling the chi flowing smoothly within him at last, Yijie could finally breathe a sigh of relief. At least for the time being, Ferris would have an easier time fending off those vengeful spirits. However, she had expended so much spiritual energy that her mind grew dizzy and drowsiness washed over her. Right at that moment, Commander Jade cautiously peeked in. "Is His Majesty truly asleep?" The sudden question startled her. Yijie awkwardly replied, "Perhaps His Majesty was simply too exhausted." Commander Jade was genuinely amazed that the king had actually fallen asleep. For days on end, His Majesty hadn't been able to close his eyes for a single wink. "So you find it strange that His Majesty fell asleep after a simple massage?" Cold sweat dripped down Jess's back. How on earth was he supposed to explain this? Perhaps he was just being overly sensitive? Thinking it over, Yijie realized that in the eyes of others, rushing recklessly to restrain Ferris was indeed quite bizarre. Just then, a man brought a blanket to drape over Ferris, earning a fierce glare from the maid beside them. "Can't you see the queen is freezing too?" Yijie smiled and waved her hand. "No need, I'll take my leave as soon as I finish the tea." Right then, the deeply slumbering Ferris suddenly nuzzled closer against Yijie's body. The three onlookers behind them instantly buzzed with excitement, their eyes glowing with juicy gossip. Yijie hurriedly gestured at them, forbidding them from letting their imaginations run wild. But to her shock, Ferris tightened his grip and wrapped his arm around her waist. Yijie was suddenly trapped in an utterly awkward predicament. Explaining seemed hopeless, yet saying nothing made it look even worse. Clearly, Ferris was merely seeking comfort in his sleep from the closest presence. Besides, the talisman charm she carried emitted a soothing, purifying spiritual energy. Seeing that Ferris showed no signs of waking anytime soon, she had to fetch another blanket. She was utterly exhausted. While not as draining as drawing talismans, regulating someone else's chi still depleted immense vitality. A while later, King Ferris was the first to awaken. Spotting the girl fast asleep, he immediately questioned Commander Jade about what had transpired. The commander quickly summarized the events, but because his recount was so brief, Ferris didn't believe a word. Sensing danger, Commander Jade swiftly turned away, trying to dodge the subject entirely. After all, how could he possibly describe the intimate hand massage they had shared? Fortunately, Ferris didn't press further. Rubbing his shoulder, he ordered, "Let the queen sleep in my chambers. Moving her elsewhere will wake her." But Commander Jade had his own suspicions. Their overly intimate gestures made it hard to believe they had truly done nothing on their wedding night. Glaring at the gossiping maids and guards, the commander barked, "Carry out His Majesty's orders at once!" Feeling completely refreshed, Ferris couldn't help wondering why every moment of relief came from Haley. Just what is going on here? Before long, Yijie was awakened by the commotion. She half believed she had died in her sleep. Why else would there be so many vengeful spirits around? Light pink hair, snow-white fingers. Still Haley? Seems I haven't died after all. Recognizing the familiar wraiths drifting everywhere, she immediately realized this was Ferris's bedroom. She bolted upright in alarm. "I need to get out of here. Why am I in this room anyway?" The maid verbatim repeated King Ferris's instructions to her. Hearing this, she chuckled softly, thinking he at least had some conscience. Perhaps she hadn't helped the wrong person, but she had completely forgotten about replying to the letter. Until today, when Ferris invited her to share a meal together. Hearing the invitation, she was somewhat taken aback. After all, they had been married for half a month, yet this was their very first time dining together. This was also the perfect opportunity to discuss replying to the letter. Meanwhile, Ferris furrowed his brows, realizing this was also his first time eating with Haley. Though he hadn't invited her just for leisure, the meeting stemmed from Commander Jess's report about Duke Duncan's letter. Anyone reading the letter could tell that Duke Duncan wanted to plant his own spies in the palace. The ministers immediately suggested that as a Duncan, the queen might become her father's puppet and a stronghold for the nobility's power. Therefore, they urged that her authority must be suppressed right from the start. Ferris saw this as an ideal chance to observe Haley's stance, to see if she was truly naive as rumored, or harboring hidden schemes. But how to broach the subject with Haley, Ferris couldn't quite figure out. Regardless, he had no intention of accepting the minister's proposal. As dark thoughts crowded his mind, the vengeful spirit seized the opening to whisper and tempt him. Standing nearby, Commander Jade noticed King Ferris growing increasingly agitated. The queen has arrived. Hearing the announcement, Ferris turned to look. The moment Haley drew near, the irritation tormenting his heart vanished into thin air. The surrounding air instantly felt purer and revitalized. As if the space around her belonged to another dimension, his splitting headache completely disappeared. How strange, I can't fathom it. Ferris unconsciously let out a soft chuckle. That reaction filled Ejai with suspicion. Though unsure what he was smiling about, she didn't forget her main goal today. Your Majesty, there is something I wish to discuss. What is it? A few days ago, my father, Duke Duncan, sent a letter. Ferris hadn't expected her to bring it up first. What did the Duke say? He wants to dispatch his people to the palace. Would your Majesty like to read the letter, although the contents aren't particularly special? The king shook his head. No need. In truth, I have already seen a transcribed copy. So what do you plan to do? Yijie was surprised that Ferris handed the decision entirely over to her. Recalling what happened on the eve of their wedding, Ferris suddenly burst into laughter. If that is what you want, go right ahead. Commander Jade couldn't help but sigh inwardly. How could His Majesty allow himself to be led by the nose like this? Yijie, however, maintained an utterly serious demeanor. Is my choice this time fairer than back then? Her blunt words made Ferris chuckle with amusement. Truly, she was a fascinating woman. Yijie, however, remained exceedingly tense. She didn't know what the original Haley would have done, but she refused to be a pawn for either the king or the duke. Nor did she intend to take her own life or the original Haley's existence lightly. Staring straight into Ferris's eyes, she firmly declared, I will reply to my father and refuse him. The despised noble lady had risen to queen, yet here she was, eager to sever ties with her scheming father. Simply because she wasn't the original Haley, and refused to let her so-called father manipulate her life like a puppet. Thus, right before the king, she refused to allow her father to plant informants in the palace. However, her decisive words made the king suspect she was being sly like a clever fox. Though Ferris didn't want Duke Duncan to succeed, any rejection from him would give the duke an excuse to cause trouble. Now Yijie, taking the initiative to reject the spies, seemingly defied Duncan's plot. Yet in truth, she achieved her own safety while making the king owe her a favor. Like father, like daughter, after all. But King Ferris's cynicism was completely wrong. The girl simply wanted to live her own life, free from anyone's control. Eyeing the banquet table laden with delicacies, Yijie couldn't wait any longer to dig in. Your Majesty, may I eat now? You may. Her vivid expressions and candid demeanor amused Ferris. The more he observed her, the more intriguing she became. Sensing something was amiss with his own thoughts, Ferris wondered if his madness was worsening. Otherwise, why on earth would he find Duke Duncan's daughter so charming? To divert his focus, Ferris announced that he would go on a hunting trip this week. Engrossed in eating, she merely hummed in response, but once it registered, she froze in shock. In the original story, Ferris was dubbed a raving wild beast, a title born from his madness. Recognizing his uncontrollable destructive urges, he tried using hunting as an outlet to quell them. In reality, however, hunting was utterly useless. It only plunged Ferris deeper into madness and lured even more vengeful spirits to torment him. Feeling helpless, she knew Ferris wanted to vent his thirst for ruining, but hunting would never help. The stench of blood would only inflame his dark desires, intensifying the torment inflicted by the wraiths. She desperately wanted to warn him that slaughtering beasts was pointless, but doing so would only make Ferris and his knights mock her. Trapped in a dilemma, she didn't know how to resolve the crisis. Right at that moment, Ferris suddenly stepped up before her. Do you have nothing to say to me? The girl looked puzzled. Do you mean asking what you should bring back for me? I don't need anything. In truth, her only wish was that Ferris wouldn't kill a single living thing. Then you should wish me a safe journey. Yes, please take care on the road. Deep down, she simply wanted to beg him not to go anywhere. Ferris remained silent for a long moment, staring intently at her. Thinking he had something else to say, she was stunned when Ferris pointed toward the knights saying affectionate farewells to their loved ones. "Are you not even going to give me that?" Seeing them sharing farewell kisses, her face instantly turned beet red. Was King Ferris actually asking her for a goodbye kiss? Seeing her flustered, panic-stricken expression, Ferris found his mood lightening considerably. Realizing she was being teased, Yijai promptly turned her head away, refusing to look at him. "Just go already and don't get hurt." Unexpectedly, Ferris leaned down and whispered softly into her ear, "Stay away from any bodies of water." Yijai touched her burning red ear. Did he fear she would drown herself in the river again like the original Haley? But why were her ears tingling so intensely? Watching Ferris's figure fade into the distance, she clearly saw vengeful spirits trailing behind him. She couldn't help worrying whether disaster was about to strike. But whatever one fears most is bound to happen. Bewitched by the vengeful spirits, Ferris completely lost control, his eyes turning red of madness. Even after the prey had stopped breathing, he kept wildly hacking away with his blade. Suddenly, a monstrous black bear charged right in front of Ferris. Commander Jade immediately ordered the archers to release their arrows. "Your Majesty, get out of the way!" But having lost all reason, Ferris remained frozen on the spot. At the same time, Yijai tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. She couldn't understand why she cared so much about Ferris, her mind filled with worry that something terrible had happened to him. So she decided to step outside for a stroll, discovering the castle grounds were far vaster than she had imagined. The still surface of the lake reminded her of Ferris's parting warning. Even without Ferris's reminder, she would never have approached it. Grandmother Youngsun had warned her countless times never to go near water. Lost in thought, she suddenly felt a chilling gust of spiritual energy. It was the very spirit she had encountered on her wedding day, the phantom boy king, Arthur. Footsteps drew nearer as her entire body trembled, and to her shock, the phantom sat down right beside her. His overwhelming spectral aura was so terrifying that the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Only one thought echoed in her mind: she must never get involved with him. But the Phantom Boy King suddenly turned to her with a smirk. "You can see me, can't you?" Addressed out of nowhere, she froze in utter shock. "I'm human and you're a ghost. Even if you claim to be a guardian spirit, at core you're still a wraith. Could you please not strike up a conversation with me so casually? I'll just ignore him and walk away." But to her shock, the Phantom Guardian Spirit directly exposed her true identity. "You are not Haley, are you?" Her mind went blank, though she quickly reasoned that high-tier spectral entities could easily see through a soul's vessel. She had almost fallen into his trap and blurted out a response. Seeing her remain silent, the Phantom tirelessly continued. "Roderick is on his way back, looking gravely wounded without even an heir to his name. What will happen if he just gone like this?" This time, panic truly gripped her heart. Leaping to her feet, she demanded, "Is he truly that badly injured?" Seeing his trick succeed, the ghost flashed a triumphant smile. "So you really can hear me speak?" His trickery completely infuriated her. How could anyone treat human life as a joke? In the eyes of spirits like you, are human lives really worth so little? The guardian spirit told her not to get so agitated. Ferris truly is severely injured. She wanted to argue further, but the bastard merely grinned. "If you want to go, hurry up. Run now, and you might still catch him in time." With that, the phantom vanished into thin air before her eyes. Realizing the gravity of the situation, she bolted off to find King Ferris. Barely surviving the Black Bear's assault, the dying king sank into darkness, silently praying for someone to save him. Running at full speed, Yijai suddenly caught his smell. When she saw Ferris being carried inside, she froze in absolute horror. The Phantom Guardian Spirit hadn't lied after all. Hearing the servants about to carry Ferris into his bedroom, she immediately objected. "No, you cannot. With a room swarming with vengeful spirits, how could they possibly let him rest there?" Frantic with worry, she paced in circles, completely overwhelmed. Suddenly, an idea flashed across her mind. She dashed back to her room, rummaged through everything, and gathered every usable talisman charm she had. Knowing this might provoke lesser spirits, she had no choice in such dire urgency, and would deal with the consequences later. Swiftly, she arrived where King Ferris was being treated. She rushed toward the chamber, only to be stopped by the guards. Just then, someone else came running up, panting heavily. Seizing the opening in the commotion, she slipped past them and burst inside. But the horrific scene before her nearly made her retch. Thinking she was sickened by the stench, Commander Jade kindly offered her a handkerchief. Yet it wasn't the blood. It was the dreadful shroud of demonic evil chi enveloping Ferris that was utterly overwhelming. Approaching quietly for a closer look, she saw that although he was injured, his life wasn't in immediate danger. Only then did she realize she had been tricked by the guardian spirit, utterly played for a fool by a phantom. Just at that moment, Ferris's faint, delirious murmurs caught her attention. His eyes were hollow, his hand clutching his weapon instinctively. He was clearly possessed by the vengeful spirits. Watching him suffer like this, her heart ached with pity. The moment Ferris raised his hand, Yijai suddenly grabbed and clasped it tightly. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" He merely stared at her blankly, his consciousness still slipping in and out. Despite wearing her spirit beads and carrying talismans, the vengeful spirits were so powerful they refused to retreat. She decided to take the initiative, chanting incantations and unleashing the shamanic arts she had mastered. Agitated, the swarm of vengeful spirits snarled and hissed threateningly at her. But she merely smirked. "Just you wait." She had once sworn never to meddle with the realm of ghosts and spirits again, yet in this world the only one capable of saving Ferris was her. No matter how perilous it was, she would never back down. "Evil spirits, return to where you belong, be gone from here!" As the incantation ended, the vengeful spirits gradually dissipated into nothingness. At that moment, Ferris, still trapped in the abyss of darkness, suddenly saw a beam of light break through from above. It was bizarre. Until now, he had always been utterly alone in this dark void. Who was calling out to him? "Your Majesty, are you all right?" Ferris slowly opened his eyes, stunned to see Haley standing before him. Dropping his sword, he whispered softly, "I am all right now." The physician rushed in to examine him. Luckily, his wounds weren't fatal. But having expended so much spiritual energy, Yijai felt dizzy and want to be faint. Ferris asked, "Why did you come here?" Hearing his question, Yijai's heart fluttered slightly. She herself didn't know why she had rushed over in such a frenzy. She had been terrified herself, yet even a simple word of thanks from him would have sufficed. But then she reasoned, why demand so much from a man who was already completely exhausted? So she stood up, preparing to take her leave. Staying here would only hinder the physician from treating his injuries. But just as she pulled her hand back, Ferris suddenly gripped it tight. "Don't go, stay a little longer." Standing beside them, Commander Jade was utterly flabbergasted. Ever since the Queen arrived, His Majesty seemed like a changed man, suddenly becoming remarkably obedient. Yijai quickly pulled her hand free. "Your arm is injured, you shouldn't exert force." In truth, her heart was racing too fast, leaving her completely flustered. But King Ferris's face darkened, clearly displeased by her withdrawal. His sullen pout annoyed Yijai, prompting her to lightly thump his chest with her small fist. "I knew this would happen the moment you left. You are forbidden from going hunting again." Struck by her playful punch, Ferris unexpectedly broke into a laugh. "Why can I not go hunting?" "Just consider it my way of protecting wildlife." Haley was torn between irritation and pity. Seeing this, Ferris ordered everyone to leave the room. In the sudden silence of the room, Yijai felt thoroughly embarrassed. Lately, she kept finding herself in such mortifying situations. Little did she know, Ferris had not taken his eyes off her for a single second. "In the darkness, I saw a glimmer of light. When I reached out, I found that you were the one pulling me back, just like how our hands are clasped right now." Yijai assumed he was merely talking in his sleep. Ferris continued, "I didn't intend to say much, but you must understand that I truly had no other choice. It may sound irresponsible and utterly useless, but there was truly nothing else I could do." His words pierced straight through her heart. It turned out he was fully aware of everything that had happened to her. Even so, his gaze remained remarkably clear. How can someone burdened with so much heavy karma have eyes this pure? Yijai lowered her head, her heart growing heavy. Seeing her dejected look, Ferris thought she was angry, but Yijai shook her head. "What right do I have to be angry?" Ferris murmured softly, "Why shouldn't you be? You are the queen now." Ferris smiled faintly. "If you're not upset, talk to me a little longer. Just hearing your voice helps clear my mind." This time, Yijai finally broke into a soft smile. 2 days later, Duke Duncan used Haley's recent fainting spell as an excuse to demand permission to send his own attendants to serve her. Ferris showed his blatant displeasure. As expected, Duke Duncan refused to let things go, yet Haley was indeed far too frail. Remembering her firm stance last time, Ferris rejected Duke Duncan's demand without hesitation. Put on the defensive, Duke Duncan resorted to playing the emotional card, claiming he acted out of paternal love. But Ferris scoffed, loving a daughter by beating her half to death? He almost exposed Duncan's abuse of Haley right then and there, but caught himself just in time. Airing such matters here would likely humiliate the queen. In the past, Ferris would never have held back, but now he showed deliberate restraint. Duncan remained stubborn, insisting on asking Haley directly, while Ferris saw right through his scheming intentions. Why did they all treat Haley as someone easy to push around? She wasn't nearly as fragile as they thought. Ferris could hardly wait to watch Duncan get slapped in the face with his own arrogance. "No one is stopping you from seeking an audience with the queen." These words made Commander Jade worry. What if the queen actually agreed? But Ferris coldly asked, "Are you taking your duties seriously at all? I asked you to investigate Haley, and you reported back that she was a docile, foolish girl who blindly obeyed her parents? Absolute nonsense." Ferris stepped into Haley's chambers. The moment his feet crossed the threshold, a sudden weight lifted from his entire body. Haley thought smugly to herself that her barrier was a huge success. Grandmother truly had been the best in the shamanic craft. Yet the moment he sat down, Ferris began to grumble. First, he scolded her for neglecting her health, then complained that Duncan was throwing a fit to send his household staff to look after her. Just imagining Duke Duncan blowing his top made Haley giggle. Hearing her laughter, Ferris let out a quiet sigh of relief. Yet gazing upon her pale face and sickly constitution, a pang of heartache washed over him. Ferris asked if she needed him to arrange for anyone from the Duncan family. Haley couldn't help but feel surprised. "Your Majesty is leaving the decision entirely up to me?" Ferris replied, "Why shouldn't I? Even I don't really know why." Haley thought to herself that having full autonomy was truly a wonderful feeling. Regardless, she would write another letter firmly turning Duke Duncan down. Hearing this, Ferris fell deep into thought. This was clearly not submissive compliance born of fear, leaving him wondering what she truly had in mind. Suddenly, his eyes caught sight of a strangely carved piece of wood that stood out immediately. Its unmistakable, vivid shape made it impossible for anyone in the room to ignore. "What on earth do you plan to do with that? Are you trying to provoke me?" The attendants around them began whispering among themselves. Convinced there was something suggestive going on, they watched in shock as the girl innocently picked it up and said, "It's just a personal hobby of mine." Her words instantly caused quite a stir. Could she mean a nighttime hobby? Naturally, Haley had no clue their minds had wandered straight into the gutter. Raising her arm adorned with prayer beads, she began explaining her craft, proudly claiming she was skilled at wood carving. "Could you return the wooden piece you confiscated earlier?" But in Ferris's eyes, this bracelet looked utterly bizarre. "And as for this totem peg, you said it needed to be a little smaller?" "That's right," the girl replied with complete candor. Ferris mused to himself, "Don't people usually prefer things a bit bigger?" To his surprise, Haley carefully inspected the wood before her, noting that bigger didn't necessarily mean more powerful. Everyone who wasn't on her spiritual wavelength was thrown into utter bewilderment. Ferris could only clutch his forehead in exasperation. "It looks hideous. You'd better put it away so no one sees it." The girl instantly deflated. The Great General Guardian totem wasn't meant to be just for display anyway. Just then, a maid stepped forward curiously. "Your Majesty, it is time for your medicine." The girl drained the bowl in one gulp and couldn't help complaining. "It's so bitter." Ferris thought she was truly peculiar, yet unexpectedly, merely watching her drink her medicine caused him to drift off to sleep. Everyone was utterly astonished. Where had his severe insomnia gone? It was supposed to be completely incurable. Commander Jade quickly noticed the pattern. Whenever the queen was present, this miracle occurred. Seeing him sound asleep, Haley gently tapped Ferris's hand, warning that sleeping like this was bad for his posture. Awakened abruptly, the man was visibly flustered. He'd been in the middle of deep thought, yet had somehow dozed off. Looking at the serene girl resting on the bed, Ferris suddenly felt he could finally get a peaceful night's sleep here. Without missing a beat, he took immediate action and climbed straight into her bed. Haley scrambled to scoot over as he said, "Move over a little. Let me lie beside you." His boldness sent the girl into such a panic that she cried out for her maids. To her dismay, the quick-witted maids swiftly shoved all the clueless guards out of the chamber. As they closed the doors, they even wished their majesties a delightful night together. Staring at the man sprawled on her bed, the girl desperately wanted to kick him back to his own quarters. But remembering the suffocating, vengeful spirits in his room, she relented. Perhaps sensing her hesitation, Ferris spoke up. "I won't do anything. I just want to borrow your bed for some sleep." At her wit's end, the girl could only puff her cheeks in grievance. He claimed he would preserve her honor, yet here he was sharing her bed. Hearing this, Ferris chuckled. How adorable. But those aren't words a wife should say to her husband. I was just teasing you because you looked upset. As she closed her eyes to sleep, Ferris suddenly spoke. About our wedding night. I am truly sorry. Opening her eyes, she was met with his intense, lingering gaze, sending her heart pounding so hard she lost her voice. The ruthless tyrant king feared by all had practically turned into an affectionate puppy before his wife. To appease her, he was even willing to cast aside all royal dignity. On our wedding night, I didn't mean to tear your dress. Haley never expected him to brood over this for so long, though she couldn't honestly tell him the dress was ruined by demonic spirits. It seemed he had genuinely taken the incident to heart. He must have suffered endlessly from the torment of those vengeful spirits. Thinking this over, Haley pulled the blanket over her head. Her own circumstances were hardly any better, yet she unconsciously felt a deep ache for a powerful man like him. In the blink of an eye, the next morning arrived. In her slumber, the girl felt something heavy weighing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Opening her eyes, she realized the man was holding her in a tight embrace. Her heart immediately fluttered into a wild frenzy, leaving her at a complete loss. He clearly promised he wouldn't do anything. Clearly, a man's word was no more trustworthy than the whispers of a ghost. Yet he was sleeping so soundly, his arms wrapping around her even tighter. At such intimate proximity, how could a 20-year-old girl with zero dating experience stay calm? Her heart raced wildly, and even counting sheep did nothing to help. Just as Haley was desperately trying to calm down, the man suddenly rolled over and pinned her underneath him. Instantly feeling his body pressing against hers, she froze in absolute tension, not daring to move a muscle. To her horror, Ferris began unconsciously shifting against her in his sleep. Pushed past her limit, she gathered all her strength and struck him hard, desperate to wake him up. Disturbed by the noise, the groggy man grumbled in irritation, rolling over to press her further into the mattress and nuzzling against her neck. Her entire body went completely numb, unable to budge. Sensing that unspeakable things were about to happen, Haley lost all patience and unleashed a flurry of punches onto the half-conscious king. The man was instantly jolted wide awake. Staring at the girl beneath him, he shot up in sheer shock. Had he lost control of himself again? He quickly lifted the duvet and saw her nightgown was still fully intact, finally breathing a sigh of relief. Once he composed himself, Ferris offered a sincere apology. Seeing no reaction from her, he gently reached out and patted her head. "Did I frighten you?" Unexpectedly, the girl puffed her cheeks in fury, glaring at him with big, watery eyes. Instantly overcome with guilt, Ferris stammered, "I'll leave right away." Yet Haley remained dead silent. Ferris scratched his head in utter helplessness. "Haley, please say something. Are you going to give me the silent treatment now?" She stayed quiet, merely staring up at him with teary, shimmering eyes. Was she truly that terrified? Haley blinked. In truth, she wasn't frightened of him, but rather utterly flustered out of her wits. Her face was burning up, her heart was hammering, and the spots he had touched still tingled with warmth. Besides, Ferris was acting far gentler than usual, making her want to pout and act a little spoiled. Only after sensing she wasn't genuinely angry did Ferris feel relieved enough to leave. Yet even after he was gone, her heart beat even more furiously. In a flash, 10 days passed, with a terrifying murderous aura clinging to King Ferris. He was still brooding over what happened that morning, especially whenever he recalled Haley's tearful eyes looking at him as if she had suffered the greatest injustice in the world. They were husband and wife, after all. There were bound to be many intimate moments ahead. But then again, this marriage had never been Haley's voluntary choice. Just as Ferris was spiraling in his conflicted thoughts, the observant knight captain brought over a jewelry box. Gazing upon the sparkling bracelet, Ferris suddenly remembered the quirky beads Haley wore and broke into a spontaneous chuckle. At the same time, Haley was searching through the royal genealogy records, hoping to uncover the secret behind the vengeful spirits haunting Ferris. Unfortunately, she couldn't decipher the ancient script, so she turned to the little spirit, the spirit, for help. Though reluctant, the little spirit recalled how Haley had drawn a protective talisman barrier for it, and begrudgingly agreed. As the spirit read aloud, Haley diligently jotted down the crucial information. It was only then that she discovered House Duncan actually hailed from a foreign lineage. When the little spirit read up to the 27th ruler, King Ferris, who was born in the year 470, making the current era year 499, she realized Ferris was currently 29 years old, 4 years older than her true past age, but 8 years older than Haley. No wonder Ferris always treated her like a little kid. At that thought, Haley couldn't help but chuckle. But then again, the grand 500-year turnover of the nation's destiny and the 10-year cycle of mortal fate both converged upon this very year. In such a pivotal year, the original Lady Haley had conveniently passed away, and her own soul, endowed with spiritual awareness, had transmigrated straight into Haley's body. Could this truly be an act of divine providence beyond mortal comprehension? Seeing her lost in thought, the little spirit was in high spirits. Since Ferris hadn't visited recently, and those terrifying entities couldn't breach the barrier, its days had been exceptionally peaceful. Haley had been actively avoiding the thought, but now the spirit had brought it right back to the surface. Had she made Ferris feel so awkward that morning that he refused to visit her? It wasn't as if she disliked him. She had simply been flustered. But no matter, she was long accustomed to being treated with cold indifference anyway. Feeling restless, she decided to take a stroll around the castle grounds to clear her head. Catching sight of Ferris sparring with Commander Jess, her heart unexpectedly skipped a beat. The maid beside her explained that His Majesty and Jade shared the same master and were very close, frequently sparring together. Their intense clash of blades completely captivated Haley's attention. Worthy of two dashing men, even their sparring resembled a duel between two elegant beasts. Ferris let out a fierce roar. Only then did Haley notice that with each battle cry, he was deliberately regulating his breathing. It seemed sparring was far more effective for channeling his energy than hunting. Recalling Ferris's distant attitude over the past few days, she felt a twinge of disappointment and turned to leave. If he didn't wish to see her, unexpectedly, the man was one step faster. The moment she turned around, Ferris grabbed hold of her, questioning her between ragged breaths. "Why are you leaving?" Ferris blocked her path, coldly demanding to know where she was headed. Keeping a polite distance, Haley addressed him as Your Majesty and answered that she was heading back to her room. But Ferris was visibly dissatisfied with her aloofness. He demanded that she speak normally and drop the excessive formalities. He was clearly the one avoiding her, yet now he acted as if it were all Haley's fault, leaving her to nod helplessly. His fickle, unpredictable temper was truly impossible to figure out. Just after telling her to speak for herself, Ferris turned his head and began muttering complaints under his breath. Caught red-handed by Haley, he stubbornly denied it, insisting he wasn't talking about her. The atmosphere grew so awkward that neither knew what to say, until he suddenly pulled out a dazzling bracelet. Just as Haley assumed he was offering a gift to make amends, he delivered a lethal blow. "The bracelet you're wearing is downright hideous." This hopelessly tactless remark was truly testing the limits of human patience. Before Haley could even flare up, Commander Jade jumped right in to expose him. His Majesty usually wouldn't spare jewelry a single glance, yet the moment he laid eyes on this piece, he immediately thought of the Queen. Pushed to his limit, Ferris completely lost his composure and barked at Jade to shut up. Haley finally understood. This man was simply awkward at expressing himself, and upon closer look, was actually quite endearing. Faced with Haley's sincere gratitude, Ferris grew even more flustered, putting on a stern face as he swiftly dragged her away. Left behind, Jade wore a profoundly aggrieved expression, grumbling that he had come as a sparring partner only to end up as His Majesty's punching bag. Watching their playful bickering, Haley couldn't suppress a chuckle. A lifelong bond of camaraderie like theirs was truly enviable. But before she could finish admiring them, Ferris domineeringly pulled her along by the hand. Walking down the corridor, Ferris suddenly asked how she had been doing lately. Haley merely offered a casual, non-committal reply. To her surprise, the man instantly bristled, stubbornly demanding that she greet him properly with utmost formality. His erratic mood swings truly left one speechless. At last, Ferris voiced what was truly on his mind. It turned out his recent avoidance had stemmed from fear of making Haley uncomfortable. He bluntly admitted that her glare that morning made him feel like a repulsive pest. Who would have thought a mighty king would start whining, claiming he had gotten hurt that morning too? The moment the word slipped out, he self-consciously rushed to deny it. Watching his adorably contradictory demeanor, Haley finally let out a sigh of relief. He didn't hate her after all. All her prior worries had been completely unnecessary. Seeing Haley remain quiet, Ferris scrambled for conversation, anxiously asking if she liked his gift. Haley quickly beamed with a warm smile, reassuring him that she genuinely loved it. She even volunteered the detail that crafting bracelets with her own hands was a hobby of hers. Seizing the moment, Haley turned the tables and leaned in close to Ferris's face, flustering the Great King in an instant. Putting on a deadpan expression, Haley emphasized that this craft required supreme focus of both mind and body. Ferris stared at the beads around her wrist and couldn't resist throwing in a sarcastic jab. "Your sense of aesthetics is certainly unique." Hearing this, Haley immediately bristled, loudly demanding that His Majesty show respect and refrain from criticizing her aesthetic tastes. Seeing her so fiercely earnest, Ferris actually burst into genuine laughter. This only caused Haley to turn red with indignance. With a swift flick of her hand, she violently swatted away the vengeful wraiths clinging to his back. Ferris blinked in confusion, suddenly feeling noticeably lighter, but quickly gathered his thoughts and pivoted to state affairs. "Those ancient texts in the royal genealogy were never taught to you. How on earth could you read them?" This question put Haley on the spot. Unable to confess that a spirit had read it to her, she feigned composure and scrambled for a hasty excuse to brush it off. Though she managed a temporary cover-up under Ferris's piercing scrutiny, Haley knew this secret wouldn't hold for long. Her every move was already under watch. After all, bearing the label of an enemy's daughter in this palace meant walking on thin ice at every step. Recalling her past life's memories, outsiders were never welcomed, and even ferrising such a record could serve as ammunition for palace gossip. Standing beside her in quiet observation, Ferris suddenly brought up Arthur Forrest, the most mysterious forbidden zone in the royal grounds. Except for members of the royal family, no one was permitted to set foot inside. Haley pondered, feeling as though she had heard that name somewhere before. She realized it was becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish between her own memories and the fragments left by the original host. This creeping sensation filled her with unease, as if her very soul was slowly being consumed. Just as she was lost in a daze, Ferris reached his hand out toward her. He actively extended an invitation, asking if Haley wished to visit that forbidden land. This was truly a rare and astonishing gesture. Haley didn't hesitate for a second, placing her hand firmly in his. If he had the courage to lead the way, she was bold enough to follow. This was the legendary Arthur Forest, an entire realm bathed in ethereal sapphire luminescence, so breathtaking it felt surreal. Haley was utterly mesmerized. Never in all her lives had she witnessed such a magnificent sight. Divine energy surged violently throughout the realm like crashing waves. She even felt an overpowering urge to prostrate herself in reverent worship. The spiritual chi here was more potent than anywhere she had ever set foot. Yet strangely enough, Ferris asked if she found it too dark. In his eyes, this brilliant divine radiance did not exist at all. He was practically blind to the holy power around him. This forest was no curse at all. It was the most formidable protective shield for the monarch. As long as he remained here, no evil spirit would ever dare approach. At this point, Haley was utterly baffled. If this forest was a divine sanctuary, what were all those terrifying rumors about? If the castle itself was not the source of corruption, where had everything gone wrong? Those foul entities could never take a single step into this forest, for the power here was exceedingly pure. Haley realized that the Ferris standing before her seemed like a completely different person. Not since their wedding night had she seen such pure, commanding radiance emanate from him. Ferris halted his steps and even laid out a seating cushion for Haley with his own hands. Such meticulous, gentle care caught her completely off guard. He sternly warned her never to wander around alone unless accompanied by him. For the forest depths concealed unforeseen perils, yet Haley found the spiritual air impossibly pristine. Could Ferris truly not sense any of it? Ferris sighed, confessing that ever since ascending the throne, he had never once enjoyed such tranquil relaxation. Haley urged him to visit this place often and continued diligently sparring with Jade as before. Only by doing so could he hope to emerge victorious in the impending life-and-death battle. Upon hearing her words, Ferris fell silent for a long time, at a loss for words. Suddenly, he spoke up. "Why does your talk sound like a dying person leaving their last will?" Haley shook her head vigorously. She had never harbored any thoughts of seeking death. Though this body had indeed once thrown itself into the freezing river, that was long in the past. She held out her hand, demanding that Ferris return her belongings. She merely wanted some peace and quiet to do her handcrafting. The prayer beads on her wrist were on the verge of breaking with deepening fractures. Relying on this worn artifact was no longer enough, so she had to carve a new one. Ferris looked at her and couldn't resist teasing, "You are far more stubborn than you look." Nevertheless, he ultimately relented and handed her items back, their little tug-of-war leaving Haley with a growling stomach. Ferris suddenly called her back, sensing a flaw in her reasoning. Not seeking death didn't necessarily mean she was fighting to live, did it? In his eyes, her passive, drift-along attitude was practically no different from resigning herself to fate. After all, when one's time comes, they will simply depart in the end. This remark struck Yijie right at her most vulnerable spot. She remained silent for a long moment before conceding helplessly. "Your Majesty, you see through mortal existence a little too clearly. To tell the truth, I am utterly exhausted to the bone. After struggling for so long, I realize that some things called destiny cannot be altered no matter how hard one tries." Ferris watched her silently. Even though he knew she belonged to House Duncan, this sensation felt profoundly bizarre. Why did she sit right before him, yet seem as if she belonged to an entirely different world? At the crack of dawn, Haley concluded her morning meditation, the only way she could reclaim some inner clarity amidst the surrounding chaos. The little spirit fluttered over, calling out the name known only to the two of them. "EJ, are you planning to continue reading today?" Haley lifted the prepared tome in her hands. Indeed, this very book. The key to breaking this deadlock likely lay hidden within these ancient words. Flipping open the thick chronicle of the kingdom's history, she found records detailing the legend of the founding king. His true origin remained an enigmatic mystery to this day. During the era when the evil empire ran rampant, he swung his holy sword to end the Dark Age, using his solitary might to rewrite history entirely. With the collapse of the old empire, The prominent noble houses switched allegiances one by one, becoming the kingdom's bedrock foundation. Everyone believed this dynastic transition had long been sealed by fate. In the council chamber, subordinates reported that the remnants scheming to restore the old empire had been thoroughly suppressed. Ferris merely sneered. Such rhetoric had circulated since the late king's reign, yet those stubborn hardliners had persistently resisted for years on end. He issued a chilling order to pull those remnants out by the roots, leaving no lingering threats behind. But no sooner had he spoken than his condition began to deteriorate unnervingly. Duke Duncan, present in the hall, immediately grew suspicious. Could the rumors of the king's madness be true? Seizing the moment, the duke cited depleted border defenses to demand the reinstatement of his eldest son. This was no mere petition. He was blatantly exploiting the king's vulnerability to grasp for power. Refusing to relent, Duke Duncan insisted that reassigning his son to manage the Southern Army was an utter indignity, even dragging the Queen's honor into play to exert pressure. At this point, King Ferris showed no mercy whatsoever. He exposed right on the spot that developing the South was a top priority, and calling it a demotion was the absolute height of stupidity. He even humiliated the Duncan family in front of everyone, exposing that the position granted to them by the late king was entirely undeserved. Yet far from being grateful, this family had the gall to complain. A barrage of scolding left Duke Duncan completely speechless without a single rebuttal. Yet seeing King Ferris straining himself as if in a life-or-death battle, those around him grew deeply concerned. If he continued working tirelessly without a single day of rest, his body would collapse sooner or later, and the situation would instantly spiral out of control. Duke Duncan protested that such words were an insult to the royal family, attempting to use honor as his flimsy last shield, but King Ferris wasn't buying that reasoning for a second. He coldly warned, "What you should be worrying about right now isn't your honor, but your very life. Even if you are the Queen's father, if you cross the line, you won't even have a life left to keep." With that, King Ferris and Commander Jade turned and walked away. The negotiation had completely collapsed in a tense, explosive standoff, leaving Duke Duncan rooted to the spot, fuming with rage and unable to utter a single word for the longest time. Meanwhile, Haley was tucked away in her room, peacefully carving wood. This leisurely peace had barely lasted before a sudden announcement echoed outside her door. "His Majesty the King has arrived." Haley was startled as the king pushed the door open, his very first words carrying an accusatory tone as he claimed her father had just caused a scene out there again. This was already the 9th time in 3 days. Whenever trouble arose, the king would dash straight to the Queen's quarters. Commander Jade, watching from the side, was utterly speechless and couldn't help but suspect. This wasn't coming to complain at all. He was clearly just looking for an excuse to flirt. Haley didn't take it to heart at all. On the contrary, she beamed with a radiant smile. This reaction caught the king completely off guard, leaving him to ask dryly and sullenly, "What are you even smiling about at a time like this?" Haley remained completely calm. If she already knew it was in jest, why get upset? Right now, she only wanted to know what new trick her old father had pulled today. This time, the king was truly at a loss for words. He explained that his father-in-law had made outrageous demands. Stubbornly demanding that Ferris reinstate his brother-in-law, he even exclaimed that their royal marriage was truly earth-shattering. But upon hearing this, Haley's mind went completely blank. Reinstatement? Where on earth did an older brother come from? She had never heard of any of this before. It seemed she would have to wait until she was alone to discreetly comb through the diary left by the original host. After all, to cope with this agonizing mess without digging into past debts beforehand, surviving these days would truly be impossible. The king probed with a question, asking if his words just now had struck her sore spot. After all, bringing up someone's family matters right to their face was a bit too harsh. Hearing this, Commander Jade internally exploded in disbelief. That wasn't just striking a nerve, that was an outright slap across the face in public. Regardless of one's standing, making a mockery of someone's family was essentially a declaration of war. Yet to everyone's surprise, Haley wore a calm, unbothered face and denied it completely. This time it was the king's turn to be stunned. He could not fathom what this woman was scheming at all. Haley spoke up to explain, "You know full well my family circumstances are far from pleasant. You've witnessed it all yourself." The king murmured thoughtfully. Indeed, the memories of Duke Duncan's abusive cruelty remain vividly clear, impossible to erase. Only now did Commander Jade realize he had completely misjudged her. Previously, everyone thought this queen was a soft pushover, and even the king had massive doubts about her reputation, but after observing her for a few days, he discovered the exact opposite. No matter how immense the pressure, Haley maintained an airtight, impenetrable composure. Even when facing the most powerful man in the kingdom, she remained extraordinarily detached and composed. This was not gentleness at all, but a lucidity bordering on ruthless, as if everything happening around her had nothing to do with her whatsoever. This unflinching poise, unmoved even if Mount Tai collapsed before her, was the true caliber of the Duncan bloodline. The king really couldn't take it anymore and had to speak up. "I am talking to you, the least you could do is make some eye contact." Yet Haley didn't even bother looking up, giving a seemingly aggrieved excuse that she feared His Majesty would confiscate her things again. The slightest scratch, and it would be branded dangerous and instantly seized. By this point, even Commander Jade could see it clearly. The king was normally such a suspicious man, yet he constantly granted this queen an inexplicable indulgence and favoritism. The king let out a laugh, assuring her on the spot that he wasn't that petty and would never steal her precious treasure. Only then did Haley dare look up, repeatedly asking if it was truly true. Seeing her guard her item like a protective kitten guarding its food, the king could only nod repeatedly in helpless defeat. Who would have thought that a dignified, formidable monarch could be held in check by such a trivial matter? Holding the bizarre wooden block in his hand with an expression as grave as if he were studying a state secret, the king couldn't hold back any longer, demanding a proper explanation from Haley. What on earth is this thing even used for? Commander Jade stood by, utterly lost in the fog, and even the maid Deborah couldn't help crying out to the heavens in her heart. What kind of bizarre masterpiece had their mistress crafted this time? From every angle, this thing looked nothing like a proper decorative ornament. Haley's crafting skills were certainly one of a kind. She told the king that the one she was carving now was a matching pair with what His Majesty was holding. The king stared at the clunky piece of wood on the table, falling into deep contemplation. He truly could not comprehend why, as a king, his room had to display two of these strange contraptions. Haley explained with complete sincerity that making this was purely to relieve stress. The moment she picked up the carving knife, all inner troubles would vanish into thin air. The king stood watching for a moment before finally squeezing out a critique. "This hobby of yours is truly quite cumbersome. After all, what high-born noble lady of your age would hide in her room acting like a carpenter?" Haley's sharp tongue spared no one. She immediately retorted to the king, "Your Majesty, you don't exactly look your actual age either." The king, failing to catch on, casually asked back, "How don't I look it?" And Haley's subsequent jab was pure gold. She clicked her tongue and teased that he looked far too youthful, making it impossible to tell he was actually 8 whole years older than her. The moment those words fell, the room went dead silent. The king felt pierced by 10,000 arrows. He had been about to dote on Haley, only to discover she was teasing him about his age. Seeing the king's choked-up face, Haley finally couldn't hold back and clutched her stomach, laughing uncontrollably. This time, the king truly couldn't sit still. He reached over, pinched her cheek, and feigned outrage, demanding, "Your courage is growing bolder by the day, daring to make a joke out of the king?" Haley laughed so hard she couldn't stop. Teasing aside, she retrieved her prized creation from the bottom of her chest and respectfully offered the freshly carved wooden totem to him, saying, "This is a gift I specially crafted for your Majesty." Holding this masterpiece, the king's expression was truly something to behold. He even searched for the most polite words to decline, because the object looked so abstract, a complete aesthetic disaster. Haley remained completely calm, explaining that while it was ugly, the point was that she made it with her own hands, conveying her heartfelt sincerity. The king started tossing sarcastic remarks once again. Feeling that accepting such a gift was entirely absurd, he grumbled, but Haley had no intention of indulging him. If he was going to complain so much, he might as well give it right back. In response, the king reacted faster than anyone, snatching his hand back in an instant. Haley couldn't help but remind him that while it looked a bit frightening, it was actually a protective guardian totem, meant to cleanse evil, ward off spirits, and banish nightmares. The king stared intently at the face carved into the wooden statue, staying silent for a long time before finally squeezing out, "This thing certainly can ward off evil. Because with a face like this, rather than chasing away nightmares, it's more likely to startle someone awake in fright." The joking aside, Haley grew serious. She said she carved this wooden statue simply hoping His Majesty could get a good night's sleep. Seeing him fall silent, Haley thought he genuinely despised it and quickly added, "If it was truly an eyesore, he could just tuck it away in a corner of the room." In truth, she knew full well her craftsmanship was amateurish, but the king might truly need this comfort right now. Looking straight at the king, she articulated clearly, "It may sound somewhat mystical, but sometimes sincere prayers from others can truly become a power that protects your Majesty." These words pierced straight into the king's heart. He was rendered speechless for a long time, and the surrounding attendants were equally stunned. Who would have thought that Haley, who usually seemed so nonchalant and carefree, could speak words of such profound depth? Haley's voice carried a tinge of melancholy. In this world, receiving a sincere prayer without expecting anything in return was truly the rarest luxury. That suffocating sense of loneliness, of having no one care, could truly be overwhelming at times. From start to finish, the king said nothing. Looking at Haley before him as if truly seeing her for the first time, he merely tightened his grip around that ugly wooden figurine. He said, "There's really no need for such heavy words. After all, I intended to accept this gift from the start." He even countered with a question, "Did you truly think I would refuse such goodwill?" Hearing this, Haley was overjoyed and hastily pressed to confirm if he truly planned to accept it. In the end, the king didn't even dare look directly into her eyes. Seeing him yield, Haley seized the moment, pulling out another wooden figurine and shoving it straight into his chest. A gift is always best given as a pair. This time the king was completely flabbergasted, clutching 2 wooden statues in his hands, unable to react for quite some time. How did gift-giving turn into a buy-one-get-one free deal? Haley beamed brightly. She said one alone was far too lonely. Even wooden figurines needed companionship. After all, she enjoyed crafting these little things anyway, so making an extra one in her free time was easy enough. The king could feel that Haley was genuinely afraid of him being lonely. This sudden surge of tenderness left him rooted to the spot. Stammering for words and unable to articulate a complete sentence, he clutched the 2 wooden statues tightly, turned around, and bolted out the door without looking back. As he left, he threw back a barked command, ordering everyone to remain where they were without moving an inch. That frantic demeanor looked exactly like someone fleeing the scene of a crime. Staring at the tightly shut door, Haley vaguely guessed that this wasn't anger at all. He was clearly so mortified that he couldn't bear to face anyone. But she had no intention of stopping here. Turning around, she grabbed a fresh block of wood, already pondering what bizarre shape she should carve next. Commander Jade stood nearby, scratching his head, wondering what kind of sacred divinity this queen truly was. Even the little ghost lost patience, loudly demanding she kick this whole crowd out of sight. In the blink of an eye, late night fell, and the entire royal palace sank into silence. Who would have thought that the 2 wooden figurines mocked so harshly during the day were now sitting proudly right at the king's bedside? One as the great general under heaven, and the other as the female general underground. This folk totem style was completely out of tune with a royal bedchamber. As the king drifted off to sleep, the dark shadows that perpetually haunted him actually began to dissolve on their own. It seemed those 2 clunky wooden guardian pillars had truly worked their magic. The king woke up, and though he had only dozed off briefly, the recent dream genuinely weighed on his mind. Could that thing have actually worked? The thought was utterly absurd, yet that woman had radiated mystery from the very beginning. Looking at the wooden figurine within arm's reach, the king sank into thought. Could all of this truly just be a coincidence? He felt this morning wasn't half bad, thinking he had finally regained some clarity. But little did he know. Sinister eyes in the dark had been glaring at him for a very long time. That eerie spectral force had been lurking in the room all along, lying in wait to ensnare him with even greater madness than before. In the end, he still couldn't escape. The moment he stepped past the doorway, darkness swallowed him whole once again. On a sun-drenched morning, my lady was practicing, but she clearly couldn't focus at all today. Even the spirit beside her noticed and couldn't help complaining about why she was dragging her feet so slowly. Yijie sighed, saying a wave of restless unease filled her heart. In truth, she knew this distraction was entirely due to the words she had read at dawn in the original host's diary. Under normal circumstances, Yijie would have dismissed it as utterly ridiculous. But reading these lines today, she couldn't bring herself to crack a smile. The diary revealed that the original Haley had actually wanted to beg Lawrence to leave everything behind and run away with her and Kayan, even though deep in her heart she knew full well he would likely reject her. Reading those desperately humble, sorrowful words, Haley felt an overwhelming pang of grief. Yet strangely, the original host had been infatuated with that lover to the bitter end. The love she bore for Lauren was truly etched into her very marrow. Even though her soul had vanished, that lingering obsession still clung to this body. The sensation was just like the smoldering ash left after a raging fire. Though the flames were extinguished, the suffocating heat remained enough to choke someone. Haley couldn't stop wondering whether the original host had ultimately spoken up to beg that man to take her away. After all, once he chose a political marriage and cast her aside, there was no turning back. She truly wanted to know what kind of life that man named Lauren was living now. A commotion echoing from the corridor abruptly cut through her thoughts, giving her a foreboding premonition of trouble outside. The spirit flew back from a loop, bringing grave news. The king had lost control once again, and this time with even greater ferocity than before. Haley was stunned. The protective talisman she gave him was utterly useless. If even the spiritual charms couldn't suppress it, no one could possibly stop the king now. Haley understood full well that this was beyond the limits of her abilities. As a shaman, the greatest taboo was letting pity cloud one's judgment and bringing doom upon oneself. Reason screamed at her that standing by with folded arms was the smartest move, with no need to gamble her life for a stranger. But just as she thought about giving up, an image flashed in her mind. The figures of the king and Lauren overlapped before her inner eye. This sudden resonance froze her dead in her tracks. The original Haley had been unable to hold on to her love in the past, but the Haley of today refused to walk that same tragic path. Looking at the phantom spirit Arthur, she declared firmly, "I must go see His Majesty." Even though reason warned that the king was extremely dangerous right now, she still had to take the gamble. But the king's bedchamber had already turned into a living purgatory on earth. Swallowed by darkness, the king had only a single thought left in his mind: destroy everything in sight. Haley sprinted all the way, finally catching Commander Jade in the hallway. Right now, she only wanted to know how the king was doing. Commander Jade's eyes were filled with deep anxiety. In a low voice, he cautioned her that although His Majesty didn't appear frenzied on the outside, she must not let her guard down. Because this temporary calm was not a sign of recovery, but rather the king gritting his teeth and enduring with his very life on the line. He was using the last shred of his willpower to strain and suppress the madness raging inside him. This balance was exceedingly fragile, like a weight hanging by a single thread. One slip and everything would spiral out of control. No matter how formidable the king was, he was ultimately still a human being who needed to be saved. Haley pushed the door open, once again standing before him. Claiming aloud that she had come to serve tea, in her heart she knew better than anyone. The prayer beads on her wrist couldn't hold out much longer, their surface riddled with cracks and ready to shatter at any second. Facing this man on the brink of losing control, Haley was truly wagering her life this time. Commander Jade stood poised and ready, prepared to charge in to rescue her at the slightest sign of danger. He truly could not understand why Haley threw herself into mortal danger time and time again. Facing a man consumed by madness, ordinary people would run away as fast as they could. In truth, Haley also knew that no matter how many times she experienced this suffocating, invisible pressure, it was impossible to get used to. It was the body's most primal, instinctive resistance when facing mortal peril. Yet she chose to brace herself and hold her ground, believing that if she followed her true calling, everything would return to its proper order. Those who flowed with this spiritual power would find life, while those who defied it faced only destruction. The room, once in utter chaos, was instantly enveloped in a brilliant radiance, forcing the surging madness and bloodlust to submit. Looking at the radiant woman glowing before his eyes, the king was completely transfixed. The watching guards could hardly believe that this seemingly frail queen could turn the tides single-handedly. The king, who had been oozing murderous intent just moments ago, seemed completely drained of energy as he finally regained his sanity. Yet the very first words he spoke were meant to comfort Haley. He told her he had slept soundly, even praising the two ugly wooden figurines for being genuinely effective. Seeing her guilty look, his heart ached for her instead, telling her not to make such an expression. But before Haley could react, his entire body went limp, collapsing right onto her shoulder. The night Jimmy truly had his eyes opened, tugging at Commander Jade and whispering that the queen was a walking sleeping pill. Whenever His Majesty saw her, he would effortlessly drift into peaceful sleep, only for Jade to snap at him to shut up, afraid of shattering this rare tranquility. But the king was still half awake, instinctively tightening his grip as if wanting to confirm something. He softly called Haley's name, but before she could make a sound, he shoved her away. He coldly warned her that in the future, whenever he was in such a state, she had better stay as far away as possible, or else she would lose her life. This instant 180-degree flip in attitude was truly hurtful. After all, to save him, Haley had exerted every ounce of her spiritual energy. But she had no intention of backing down. Grabbing the king's hand in return, she reminded this arrogant sovereign that he seemed to have forgotten an important fact. She was a Duncan, and when it came to survival skills, no one was more expert than her. Therefore, there was no need to give her any special concern whatsoever. He could simply treat her like any ordinary member of the Duncan family. The king fell silent, unable to utter a single word. Haley had calculated carefully in her heart. The moment she sensed real danger, she would absolutely be the first to slip away and steer clear of this man. However, looking at how close they were right now, maintaining a so-called safe distance would likely take quite a bit of effort. The king suddenly spoke up, asking what Haley was up to. Haley reacted just as quickly, immediately making the excuse that she was giving him a relaxing massage. Saying it was because he looked so exhausted, the king softly whispered that she was a little swindler. Deep down, he knew full well Haley was always acting, deliberately putting on a flawless front just to maintain an elusive distance between them. Yet while calling her a swindler with his mouth, his body naturally leaned closer to her. Jimmy stood watching nearby, eyes popping wide. His Majesty actually fell fast asleep. It seemed that as long as Haley was here, his chronic insomnia was completely banished. This instantaneous effect caught everyone completely off guard. Haley was busy tending to the resting king, but in the eyes of onlookers like Jimmy, this picture looked all kinds of wrong. Clearly the king was the dangerous one, yet now it looked as though Haley was actively throwing herself at him. The king groaned drowsily, letting his entire body weight slump onto her. Now Haley was truly in trouble. Just when she thought she had gained an advantage, she was pinned down, unable to move an inch. She couldn't help grumbling under her breath that His Majesty was far too heavy. But in Jimmy's mind, this scene looked just like a massive black panther completely squishing a little pink fox. Struggling with all her might to catch her breath, Haley quickly called out. Commander Jade immediately answered with utmost respect. Haley leaned in and curiously inquired, "How long has His Majesty been like this?" Commander Jade hadn't quite caught on yet, assuming she was asking out of concern for the king's health. In the end, Haley let out a helpless sigh. What she wanted to ask was not that at all. Hesitating for a moment, she bluntly blurted out what was on her mind. Just when did His Majesty start becoming so insufferable? This question left Commander Jade completely frozen in shock. Haley remained utterly calm, defending herself by saying she truly couldn't find a gentler word. It turned out that ever since his coronation, the king had suffered from occasional migraines, and his temperament had grown increasingly eccentric as well. However, becoming as severe as it was now had only begun recently. Hearing this, Haley was somewhat surprised. Ever since ascending the throne, for 3 agonizing years, the king had endured this pain. She couldn't help marveling that His Majesty's endurance was truly astounding. But before she could finish sympathizing, the king shifted in his sleep, slowly sliding down from her shoulder. This position was exceedingly intimate, causing Haley's entire body to freeze stiff. Standing beside them, Commander Jade turned his face away immediately, crying out internally that he wanted no part of his superior's intimate matters, terrified that knowing too much would get him silenced. Haley was now in total panic, struggling to push him off while whispering in protest, begging His Majesty to let her go. But the king was dead asleep. Having no other choice, Haley let him rest his head upon her lap. Seeing him cling to her so tightly, she guessed he had truly held out to his absolute limit. Haley suddenly had an idea and asked Commander Jade if he could spar with His Majesty like before. To her surprise, Commander Jade refused flatly, saying, "The moment His Majesty holds a weapon, he turns into a completely different person. That stance of his is ready to fight to the death." Haley was taken aback. In her memory, the king looked so joyful when practicing swordsmanship. So why did it sound like a catastrophic hazard coming from Jade? Forbidding him from touching weapons was probably not the best solution. Because having held him so many times today, she could feel that this body was born for battle. That supreme sovereign aura was etched into his very bones. So even with his eyes closed, his overwhelming pressure could not be hidden. Haley sighed and told Commander Jade that if she had to clean up the mess every time he went berserk, she would sooner or later collapse from exhaustion. No one could handle such an endless mess. She suggested taking His Majesty out for walks more often, taking him to places like the Arthur Forest to breathe fresh air, rather than keeping him cooped up in the palace to suffocate. Commander Jade pondered for a while before finally reminding her that the forest was a forbidden royal sanctuary where no one outside the royal family could enter. Hearing this, Haley's first reaction was confusion. She thought to herself, what was so special about that place? But before the words left her mouth, she suddenly came to her senses. How could she have forgotten such basic common sense? She was officially part of the royal family now. She hastily mumbled to cover her embarrassment, but inside her thoughts were completely tangled. After all, the memories of her past life and those of the original host had merged completely, like 2 edited films spliced onto a single reel. Even she could barely distinguish which part belonged to reality anymore. This sense of usurped memories made her feel as though she was losing herself. The continuous jolts of conflicting memories made Haley's head throb, as if splitting open, truly unable to endure it. She only wanted to hurry back to her room and collapse onto her bed. Before leaving, she did not forget to instruct them to take good care of His Majesty. The current situation could not be neglected for even a single second. This sleep lasted straight through until the following day. Yesterday, the moment she entered her room, she had completely shut down, collapsing limp onto the bed without an ounce of strength left to move. Though she had slept for a full day, waking up left her body still utterly drained, her stomach churning with waves of nauseating discomfort. Despite being in such a miserable state, she still couldn't let go of her worry. She wondered how that king was doing right now. Haley lay dazedly in bed, forgetting even her mandatory morning meditation. In her ears, she even hallucinated hearing grandmother Youngsan murmuring scoldings. By reflex, she glanced down at the prayer beads on her wrist. Thank goodness her prized treasure wasn't lost. Although it looked somewhat frayed and worn, with some mending it could still be used for now. Recalling yesterday's earth-shattering events, Haley began to worry once more. Could His Majesty be planning to play another game of hide-and-seek with her? She had intended to disregard the world today and stay curled up resting in her room, but the flow of events left her with no way out. Haley was muttering to herself, wondering who was coming, casually grumbling whether her father was throwing another fit of madness. Only to look up and see the king standing towering right before her. She had been caught red-handed bad-mouthing him behind his back. Haley flusteredly waved her hands, explaining that things were not like that at all. Jimmy stood nearby, stomping his feet in frantic anxiety, wondering how anyone could embarrass His Majesty so blatantly on the spot. Fortunately, Deborah stepped in to smooth things over, saying these scenes were so common. Haley could only sheepishly ask, "Did Your Majesty come here for something today?" Yet the king only stared silently at her, making the atmosphere awkward to the extreme. Suddenly, the king opened his mouth, delivering a single line that instantly silenced her. "Does a husband entering his wife's room truly need a reason?" Haley cried out in her heart. This attitude changed far too quickly, acting just like a patient arriving for a follow-up visit, and she could already picture him whining about his troubles. Yet she had no intention of letting him off the hook so easily. She deliberately brought up his previous barbed remarks, asking who it was that vowed never to accept a gift from a woman who had someone else in his heart. The moment those words left her mouth, the king's expression clearly stiffened, snapping that she should know when to stop and not drag up old scores to chew on again. Seeing that Haley had no intention of stopping, the king grew even more exasperated, saying her sarcastic, prickly demeanor was the spitting image of that old father of hers. Even the butler and maid standing beside them exchanged wide-eyed, stunned glances. His Majesty was usually so dignified, yet why was he joining in to badmouth his father-in-law today? Mockery aside, Ferris casually took a seat. Looking at Haley, he said, "We didn't get to finish our tea yesterday, so let's make up for it today." Facing a table laden with pastries, Haley munched away voraciously, completely oblivious to the slightly odd atmosphere. Sitting beside her for quite a while, Ferris clearly had no interest in the sweets, merely biding his time for the right moment. Just as Haley reached for another pastry, Ferris suddenly spoke up, "Come over here and try doing that again." Still chewing with her cheeks stuffed, Haley stared blankly, having no idea what he was talking about. With a deadpan serious face, Ferris even brought up a cat for comparison. You know, that motion where a cat kneads up and down with both paws. Only then did Haley's brain finally catch up. Wasn't that the desperate massage she had scrambled to give him last night? This was truly a scene of dying from sheer embarrassment. Right now, she wished she could just dig a hole and crawl into it. Haley's composure completely crumbled. It turned out that in Ferris's eyes, the magic she had desperately cast last night looked just like a cat kneading dough. She had exhausted herself to the bone, only for all her hard work to seem like child's play to him. Just as she was questioning her life choices, Ferris dropped another remark. "It seems your wish from last night didn't come true." Hearing this, Haley was left utterly baffled in a haze of confusion. What wish? What riddle is this guy playing at now? Ferris maintained his teasing, sarcastic tone. "Looking so distracted last night, you must have been thinking of another man." Taking a closer look, Haley noticed his complexion was clearly rosy, proving that last night's struggle hadn't been in vain. Her magic had indeed worked. Caught red-handed, Ferris frankly admitted that he had indeed slept soundly. Just as the masters reached a truce, the servants outside, the butler and the maid, began bickering back and forth. Both accused the other of lying, convinced that nothing romantic had actually happened between Haley and Ferris. Watching the two clowns, Ferris felt like his head was about to explode. Servants these days were truly getting out of hand. While the magic working was great news, Haley was still secretly puzzled as to why he made such a bizarre request. What on earth was he scheming? Ferris, meanwhile, began questioning himself as well. He wondered if his fierce demeanor earlier had made Haley so guarded around him. Although he sensed Haley was certainly hiding secrets, his intuition told him this woman posed no threat to the royal family. Haley, on her part, kept weighing her options. The man before her truly seemed to harbor no ill intent. At least for now, he appeared safe enough. Yet Ferris refused to let it go, insisting on pressing Haley to admit that she actually knew everything. Backed into a corner step by step, Haley finally surrendered when it came to a battle of wits. She was truly no match for this king. Since there was no escape, she decided to yield. After all, it was just playing along, and nothing disastrous should happen. Haley gestured for him to give her his hand, constantly reassuring herself to keep her guard up and act as if nothing was amiss. But Ferris was not so easily fooled. Observing silently, he noted that, just as expected, these hands were far too soft, unlike those of someone who regularly trained, without a single callus on her fingertips. This completely contradicted her usual claims, showing no signs of someone who frequently held chisels for woodwork. Why was she lying? Just as Ferris was about to question her further, he stopped abruptly. The ever-composed king suddenly changed his expression right then and there. He blurted out an out-of-the-blue question, asking if Haley was deliberately seducing him. Haley froze in place. What on earth was happening? With an unruffled face, Ferris reminded her that her dress was disheveled, exposing her bare skin. Haley looked down, and this time she was completely mortified. Engrossed in conversation earlier, she hadn't noticed her neckline had slipped down so far. She hurriedly clutched her collar, wishing she could dig a hole on the spot and bury herself. In complete panic, she clumsily tried to readjust her dress. At the same time, she cursed inwardly at how ridiculous the gown's design was. It seemed fine when she put it on, but the more she adjusted it now, the messier it became. Unable to bear it, she called out loudly for Deborah, wanting her maid to rush in and rescue her. Little did she know that Deborah, standing right outside the door, not only played deaf but even casually whistled. While absolute chaos reigned inside the room, the idle servants outside gathered around, gleefully eavesdropping on the gossip. Glancing at the two nosy meddlers outside, Ferris felt a surge of speechless exasperation. These servants were truly taking things too far. Deciding to take matters into his own hands, he told Haley to move her hands away and helped adjust her disheveled dress. Originally intending just to diffuse the awkwardness as the distance between them closed, the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. Looking at the flustered woman before him who didn't know where to look, Ferris knew very well that this time, his own heart was the one skipping a beat. This ambiguous tug-of-war had only just begun. Putting on an all-knowing expression, Ferris bluntly remarked that Haley was utterly incapable of hiding her thoughts. In response, Haley bristled like a porcupine and loudly scolded him for outright harassment. Ferris felt rather aggrieved himself. He had clearly only tried to fix her dress, so why was he being bitten back like this? Flushing with anger, Haley fumed. When encountering something like that, you should have pretended not to see it. But Ferris didn't think so. If he had ignored it just now, wouldn't that sight have been laid bare for other men to see? Still fuming, Haley reproached him for speaking so brazenly. Ferris retorted with blunt directness. Was he supposed to write a secret letter and slip it to her under the table instead? The two eavesdropping servants outside froze entirely. The commotion inside was truly getting wilder and wilder. Seeing the tension about to freeze over again, Ferris quickly softened his stance, soothing her with an apology while gently coaxing her to answer his earlier question. But Haley's defenses had completely collapsed, leaving her unable to think straight, so she bluntly ended the conversation. I hate you. Rolling with the punches, Ferris casually chimed in. Hate is fine as long as you don't hate me too much. Softening his voice with sweet words, he gently consoled her and bluntly stated that today's Haley was far more captivating than when they first met. After a long silence, Haley finally whispered back, You look a lot easier on the eyes than before, too. Hearing her answer, Ferris couldn't help chuckling. He gently asked if she was feeling any better now. Though Haley refused to back down outwardly, she firmly resolved in her heart to lie low from now on and stay far away from trouble. Unfortunately, no sooner had the thought sparked than trouble came knocking at her door. After all, life never goes according to plan. She had sworn up and down not to stand out anymore, yet current circumstances forced her not to turn a blind eye. Even at the risk of exposing her identity, this time she had no choice but to take action. Even though she had accomplished a major feat, Haley felt no joy in her heart, because displaying such supernatural abilities would only invite endless complications. At the same time, Ferris discovered that his body was miraculously taking a turn for the better. Jade pushed open the door and entered, carrying a top-secret report. What was expected to be a routine investigation yielded findings that sent chills down one's spine. It turned out the death of his first fiancée was no accident at all, but a deliberate poisoning that ended her life. True to expectations, Duke Duncan, eager to secure his status as royal in-law, had even dared to poison his second fiancée, an ambition so terrifyingly insane. Ferris knew full well that only ironclad evidence could leave that old fox with no way to wriggle out. Just then, Jade reported another update. Haley had brought 10 full volumes of diaries with her from the Duke's estate. Jade lowered his voice and suggested investigating the contents of those diaries, wondering if they might reveal the Duncan family's fatal weakness. Ferris fell silent for a moment before abruptly changing the topic. Has that old fox made any moves lately? Jade reported that the old fox had not given up his schemes, still pushing to reinstate Duncan family loyalists. Ferris knew this blatant provocation was clear, and simply opening the diaries Haley brought would give him full leverage over the Duke. Yet he refused, giving the excuse that he refused to be a petty villain snooping into his wife's private life. Standing beside him, Jade almost went crazy hearing that. In the past, such troublesome figures would have been executed by His Majesty long ago. Now, the king seemed like an entirely different person. Could it be that he was truly under that woman's complete influence? Ferris waved his hand, wanting no more of these mundane political affairs. He suddenly invited Jade to go unwind for a bit. Looking at the king's unusual behavior, Jade clicked his tongue inwardly. Is this still the cold-blooded workaholic I once knew? Everything seems to be getting stranger by the day. Haley thought she could slip away to find a moment of peace. But before she could even settle in, that nagging ghost appeared once again. Sporting a narcissistic smirk, Arthur leaned in, persistently demanding why she paid no attention to a handsome guy like him. Haley just wanted to vanish into thin air. She had barely caught a breath of quiet before this sticky nuisance latched onto her again. Arthur kept droning on about his good looks, lamenting that his charm was losing its competitive edge. Haley felt her head throbbing. How could this guy talk so much? She snapped back, "If you're so handsome, are you planning to seduce some female ghost?" To her surprise, Arthur wasn't offended at all. Instead, he found Haley more and more amusing. Haley merely begged for some peace and quiet, pleading with him not to say another word. But Arthur shamelessly pressed closer, claiming he was simply interested in her. Haley put on a cold face. Who would ever want to be stalked by a ghost? This special brand of attention was something she could totally do without. Arthur quickly clarified, insisting his interest was purely aesthetic appreciation, with no ulterior motives whatsoever. He thumped his chest proudly, declaring he wasn't some vengeful spirit seeking lives, but a true guardian deity. He advised Haley to rest completely assured. Whether vengeful spirit or guardian deity, all Haley wanted right now was a peaceful life. Yet these supernatural beings from beyond the mortal realm took turns knocking on her door. Arthur suddenly drew close, delivering a remark that hit right where it hurt. Haley kept preaching about wanting a normal life, yet in reality, she was actively reshaping fate with her own hands. Striking her sore spot, those words left Haley momentarily speechless. To mask her fluster, she grabbed a tree branch and shooed the spirit away like a fly, yelling for him to get lost. Far from offended, Arthur beamed brightly, even shamelessly asking if this handsome face of his truly wasn't adorable. Haley coldly threw cold water on his pride, saying she had zero interest in bratty kids. Arthur hurriedly defended himself, claiming that despite his youthful looks, he was actually an ancestor over 500 years old, but Haley couldn't care less. No matter his age, his only job right now was to disappear out of her sight. On the training grounds, the tension escalated as the sharp clatter of wooden swords echoed relentlessly. This time, Jade genuinely couldn't hold out any longer. Ferris was clearly in a foul temper, unleashing fiercely relentless strikes. Swinging his sword, he scolded loudly. For the dignified captain of the Royal Knights to not even best his own king was pathetic. Jade quickly bowed to apologize, promising to double his efforts. But Ferris was in no mood to hear his excuses. He noticed something odd about his body, an unbelievable lightness and an unprecedented surge of power that left him exhilarated, itching to drag Jade into a few hundred more rounds. Right then, a mysterious streak of azure light flashed before his eyes. Ferris halted instantly. What on earth was that? Without further explanation, he ordered Jade to withdraw, emphasizing that he required no protection. Before Jade could even catch his breath, Ferris bolted away like a tempest. Even Ferris himself was astonished by his terrifying speed, wondering where this sudden strength had come from. Guided by a strange premonition, Ferris pursued the trail deep into the gardens, sensing a secret waiting just ahead. Yet as he recognized the path, his heart sank, for venturing further led to the place he least wanted to recall. The lakeside garden, where not long ago, Haley had thrown herself into the water to end her life. The lingering thought made him deeply unsettled. At that moment, Haley was crouching on the grass, absent-mindedly doodling random circles on the ground. She suddenly asked, "If you're the guardian deity of this place, why didn't you help Ferris? Did he truly commit some unpardonable sin that forces him to endure such punishment?" Arthur landed softly before Haley, a playful glint of mockery in his eyes as he whispered back, "Do you really want to know the truth about that man?" Then he chuckled. "Just kidding. How could I possibly tell you such an earth-shattering secret? Hearing this, Haley was left speechless. Dealing with temperamental spirits always ended with her drawing the short straw. But Arthur didn't forget to add that he could hear everything Haley had been doing. The situation had spun completely out of control. No one would tell her the truth, and no one was there to guide her next move. Even grandmother, the only person who could give her advice, was no longer around. On the road ahead, she had no choice but to brave the storms all on her own. It seemed her life in this world was destined to turn into a total mess once again. Haley looked down at the palm lines on her hand, finding them too tragic to bear. Her destiny in this life was truly far too pitiful. As she was muttering and lamenting her cursed misfortune from birth, Arthur behind her suddenly called out a name softly. Kang Yijay? In that instant, the girl froze in utter shock. That was a name she had never breathed to a single soul. This Arthur was definitely no ordinary phantom. Just how many more secrets was he hiding? Arthur continued, both you and Haley have already died once, so what else are you afraid of? Hearing those words, fury flared up inside Haley. How can a ghost who died ages ago speak so lightly of the living? Clenching her skirt, she ultimately reined herself in. Arguing with a spirit would only exhaust her and solve nothing. Right then, Arthur seemed to notice something and remarked that Ferris was approaching. Sure enough, Ferris had tracked her down. Judging by the furious pace at which he stormed over, trouble was certainly brewing. Arthur stood by with amused delight, remarking that Ferris was dragging an entire horde of stray wraiths behind him. Could it be that he saw the two of us together? Does he think he caught an affair red-handed? Haley was at a loss for words. In such dire straits, he still had the mood to crack jokes. Drawing closer with every step, Ferris emanated a suffocating, murderous aura. But Arthur had no intention of backing down as he leapt onto his white steed. Leave this rabble to me. You just enjoy your moment of quiet. That nonchalant demeanor showed he couldn't care less about the nuisance before him. On the other side, Ferris was tightly besieged by a foul dark energy, yet Arthur showed no sign of stopping. Spurring his horse forward with a dazzling burst of cyan light, he charged straight into the murky darkness. Who would have thought a mere spirit could possess such tremendous explosive power? The radiant cyan glare ripped through the shadows in an instant. Haley couldn't help complaining, "If you're that capable, why didn't you help Ferris sooner?" Unexpectedly, the guy pulled a hit and run, laughing as he called out that he was taking off, leaving Haley fuming behind him and cursing him for being a stingy pest. Before Haley could collect her wits, steady footsteps were already right upon her. Halting in front of her, Ferris's first words were filled with concern, asking why she had wandered here all alone. Haley was taken aback. Was it because this place was too close to the water? She retorted by declaring that as the queen, she had every right to stroll to her bedchamber whenever she pleased. Hearing her sassy reply, Ferris chuckled, teasingly remarking that her skin was getting thicker by the day. Haley quickly covered her tracks, insisting she was only getting some fresh air and had zero intention of jumping into the lake again. Looking at her stubborn rationalizations, Ferris momentarily didn't know how to handle her. Gazing at the scribbles on the ground, Ferris blurted out, "Are you playing in the dirt?" Haley chuckled inwardly. This king's way of speaking was surprisingly adorable at times. Playing along, she admitted she was playing in the dirt, while Ferris put on a helpless expression, scoffing at how she could find fun in such a bizarre hobby. But Haley swiftly fired back, staring at his clothes and asking, "Did your Majesty go sword training again today? Your clothes are just as filthy as mine, aren't they?" At this, Ferris was left utterly speechless with no room for denial. Haley wondered how on earth he had managed to pinpoint her location so accurately. Could there truly be some magical bond linking the two of them? But she had no time to ponder further. Right now, only one thought consumed her mind: how to cure this stubborn patient of hers. She commanded authoritatively, "Now that you're done training, let's head into the forest." Ferris was stunned, and before he could comprehend what was happening, Haley nonchalantly announced, "It's time for a walk," leaving Ferris utterly dumbfounded. It turned out that in this woman's eyes, he was no different from a pet that needed daily walking. Ferris chuckled teasingly, remarking that she was far bolder than he thought, even wondering if this was truly her real personality. Because compared to the rumors, she was an entirely different person. Haley's heart skipped a beat. Oh no. Had she overplayed her hand? Was she supposed to drag out the original owner's timid old persona to act again? But on second thought, dealing with all those spirits had exhausted her enough. Where would she find the energy to play games with mere mortals? What troubled her most was how genuinely joyful she felt whenever she was by this man's side. That happiness almost made her forget her precarious situation. Seeing Haley suddenly fall quiet, Ferris found himself unaccustomed to the silence. He pressed her, asking why she was so quiet. He told her to speak her mind freely, as even her most unreasonable demands seemed acceptable to him now. Hearing that, Haley didn't hold back at all, turning into a nagging monk as she droned on, telling him to visit the high priest and get regular health checkups from royal physicians. It was truly a comprehensive healthcare routine. Listening to her chatter on, Ferris couldn't help laughing playfully. "Your tone sounds just like a wife's, doesn't it?" Far from backing down, Haley raised an eyebrow and shot back. "Would your majesty like me to nag you for a few more rounds?" Chuckling, Ferris shook his head and offered his hand directly. "Let's go to Arthur Forest." Although being with Ferris was delightful, Haley knew that sinking too deep might put her in grave danger. To maintain distance, she deliberately feigned sore feet, telling Ferris to go ahead alone. She beat around the bush, claiming this was to help the patient build self-reliance, but Ferris didn't fall for her trick. He countered, "What good does it do if I go alone?" The divine power of this forest was truly formidable. The moment Ferris stood there, his aura shifted entirely. Frankly speaking, even if Haley gave it her all, she couldn't match half of his true strength. Normally, with an apex powerhouse of his caliber, her interference would be completely redundant, but now the situation had flipped entirely. Who would have thought that the dignified king would so comfortably sprawl out on the ground like that? Haley asked in bewilderment what on earth he was doing. Yet he calmly replied that lying like this was the only way to sleep soundly. Haley was left speechlessly exasperated, feeling as if she had been turned into a body pillow. But Ferris's following words were the real definition of giving an inch and taking a mile. Haley helplessly reminded him, "Your Majesty, what you're doing counts as harassment." But Ferris countered right back, "Then what do you call the time you helped fix my clothes?" At this point, Haley had no room left to argue. Ferris's voice suddenly turned serious. He admitted knowing this marriage brought her much hardship, but since they were husband and wife now, teasing a little shouldn't be too excessive. Seeing Haley fall quiet, Ferris playfully pushed further, cheekily declaring he was eagerly anticipating what silly words she would say next. Haley could only shake her head with a wry smile. Facing a king who grew increasingly adept at flirting, she was utterly defeated. Despite all the ridiculous predicaments and endless bickering, Ferris found that this feeling right now wasn't bad at all. But at the mention of next month's Royal Hunting Festival, Haley jumped in panic, somehow losing her balance and knocking the king over, instantly shattering the romantic mood. Haley pleaded with Ferris to cancel the hunt, urging him to avoid further slaughter. But Ferris was in a tight spot. While he managed an excuse to dodge it last year, there was no escaping it this year. The one fiercely opposing the cancellation was none other than Haley's own father, Duke Duncan, leaving her with no choice but to shut her mouth. Ferris assumed she felt pity for the small beasts, but in truth, Haley knew she urgently had to devise a countermeasure. On the surface, this hunting festival was about sport, but in reality, it served as a high-stakes social arena for the nobility. With countless prying eyes lurking in the shadows, a nameless terror had always haunted the depths of Ferris's soul. He never wanted anyone to witness his blood-soaked, crazed state. But gazing at Haley, he grew unsettled. Could her earlier words mean she had vaguely sensed something? In truth, Haley had seen through him long ago. This man always bottled up his feelings, clearly terrified to death, yet still putting on a tough front before her. Ferris had never admitted he was losing control. After all, as a king whose every word swayed the realm, that price was far too heavy to bear. He had always believed that once he voiced that deep secret, he would truly become a mad king. Yet looking at Haley right before him, his resolve wavered for the very first time. She was supposedly the daughter of his bitter enemy, a planted spy sent to keep tabs on him. The moment he revealed any vulnerability, she could easily report it back to her father. Ferris understood those risks better than anyone. Even so, he still softly called her name. Even knowing a trap might lie ahead, he still wished to bare his soul to her, wagering everything on this single gamble. In the end, Ferris decided to lay all his cards on the table. He confessed that he was far from normal, feeling as though he was completely broken inside. With each passing day, he teetered perilously on the edge of the abyss, bracing for collapse. He himself had no idea what to do next. Haley reached out to stop him, gently assuring, "Things are not as terrible as you think." Looking at the deeply troubled man before her, she comforted him. "It's all right. You are not that kind of person, so don't force yourself to say any more." Haley spoke softly. "You are not crazy, nor are you completely broken. I know what kind of person you truly are. A man like you is definitely not the monster people make you out to be." She even felt guilty for being able to help him so little. Ferris uttered not a word, yet felt more relieved than ever before. This woman was truly extraordinary. The warmth of being truly understood made him dismantle his defenses entirely. Haley promised that if he participated in the hunting festival, she would personally tie her handkerchief onto his arm. Ferris softly agreed. In that fleeting moment, the distance between their two hearts seemed to vanish completely. A few days later, in the solemn council chamber, someone brought up the upcoming royal hunt, to which Ferris responded with an ambiguous demeanor. Right at that moment, Duke Duncan spoke up, sarcastically asking if His Majesty was feeling unwell anywhere. Ferris fired back instantly. "What? Are you hoping I fall ill?" Duke Duncan smiled outwardly while coldness lingered inside. Feigning mere loyal concern as a subject, the tension in the room reeked heavily of gunpowder. The more Ferris looked at him, the more disgusted he felt. How could someone as gentle as Haley have such a father? Even more irritatingly, the two did share some resemblance, so looking at the old fox's face only reminded him of his wife. His fury flaring up, he immediately ordered Jade to bring over the dossier. If his opponent refused to know his place, he had no choice but to present a grand gift in return. This burning resentment had to be unleashed one way or another. A thick stack of denunciation letters was slammed right in front of Duke Duncan. All evidence of tax evasion was now firmly in Ferris's grasp. Once the royal court launched an investigation, this matter would be beyond salvation. Aren't you usually the one who values honor above all else? Why do you commit such filthy deeds behind everyone's back? Ferris issued a final warning. While he still had patience, the Duke had better keep his mouth shut. He granted him one last chance to clean up his own mess. Before departing, he deliberately turned around and announced that next month's royal hunt would proceed as planned. He didn't even forget to deliver a lethal parting shot. "Thanks to marrying such a virtuous queen, my health has been exceptionally robust lately." That remark felt just like a fatal final blow. Duke Duncan sat in dead silence, unable to squeeze out a single word for the longest time. Ferris strode out of the room without looking back, leaving Duke Duncan alone to stew in bitter rage. He realized the king had completely transformed. His eyes now gleamed with lethal intent, and his calculated demeanor left no vulnerabilities for anyone to exploit. He had assumed crowning his daughter queen would grant him effortless control over the court, never expecting his flawless scheme to collapse so utterly. What gave him the worst headache now was having no clue what game Haley was playing to drop the ball at such a crucial moment. In the quiet depths of the night, Haley sat by the window in silence, lost in thoughts no one could fathom. Just yesterday, Ferris had ruthlessly put Duke Duncan in his place. Yet in the blink of an eye, he was casually sleeping over in that very man's daughter's bedchamber. This absurd twist left even little Spirit stunned, marveling at the sheer audacity of this king. When Ferris awoke, he was startled to find that Haley had stayed up the entire night. He stared at the mess of tangled symbols resembling childlike scribbles, completely baffled as to what on earth she was making. Little did he know that Haley was diligently crafting a formidable, miraculous protective charm. Every stroke she etched blazed with lethal chi and perilous incantations. Haley was practically on the verge of losing her mind, as the spirit bead bracelet on her wrist showed signs of crumbling to dust. That was her life-saving talisman, so she had to hurry and complete a replacement before the old beads broke down entirely. Standing beside her, Ferris watched with a heart full of bewilderment. He suddenly recalled the classified intelligence report stating Haley was wildly obsessed with fashion. Could these bizarre scribbles really be the latest trend? Unable to contain himself, Ferris blurted out, asking who on earth had compiled that intelligence report. Standing nearby, Jade awkwardly confessed that it was his own handiwork, a truly catastrophic intelligence blunder. Meanwhile, Haley was inwardly cursing as she carved these hideous talisman characters. For aesthetics? This was meant to save lives in the direst of emergencies. Haley had to constantly brainwash herself, repeating that all this madness was merely discipline for her soul. Seeing her finally stop, Ferris nonchalantly asked, "Finished yet?" Satisfied with her answer, the king suddenly flipped the script, patting the empty spot beside him on the bed and beckoning Haley to come over. Jade stood there in a daze, utterly bewildered as to why His Majesty had no intention of leaving. But before he could utter a word, Deborah seized him by the collar and dragged him right out. Deborah grumbled under her breath that men had zero tact, knowing full well they needed to clear out and give the couple space. Now only the two of them remained, one lounging across the bed, the other curled up in an armchair, as the awkward tension reached its absolute peak. Ever since returning from Arthur Forest, Ferris had practically made himself at home here. Whenever he had a free moment, he would slip into Haley's room to catch some sleep. She didn't bother stopping him, knowing that thanks to her spiritual cleansing, this room was by far the safest haven in the entire imperial palace. Letting him get a peaceful night's rest felt like a simple favor she could do along the way. The problem was, the sky was pitch black now, yet this man showed no intention of leaving anytime soon. The more Haley thought about it, the more uneasy she felt, her mind spiraling into a flurry of scandalous, not safe for work scenarios. She even began to suspect whether he planned to camp out here for the entire night. While she was wrestling with her chaotic thoughts, Ferris suddenly stood up and leaned in without a word. Ferris moved like lightning. Before her brain could even register it, he grabbed her hand and pulled her straight to the edge of the bed. He played the gentleman to an exaggerated degree, volunteering to take the sofa and letting her have the soft bed to rest. Seeing his dutiful, self-sacrificing demeanor, Haley was suddenly overcome with guilt. Thinking about it, he was a majestic monarch who had struggled so hard to find peaceful sleep, so forcing him to curl up on a cramped sofa felt far too heartless. After an internal tug of war, Haley bit the bullet and offered, "Your Majesty, please sleep on the bed." The moment the words left her mouth, Ferris agreed instantly without a single second of hesitation. The sheer speed with which he vaulted onto the bed gave Haley an eerie feeling. Had this guy been lying in wait for her to say that all along? Lying side by side beneath the warm blanket, Ferris even seized the chance to bite back playfully. He complained that daring to banish the king to the sofa would surely be branded as high treason if word got out. Haley rolled her eyes in disdain, muttering faintly under her breath, "This is clearly my room, and the bed is mine too." Hearing that, Ferris chuckled smugly, remarking that luckily his queen wasn't completely cold-hearted. That remark utterly silenced Haley. She had set out to be kind, only to end up digging her own grave. Ferris suddenly lowered his tone, softly whispering Haley's name. Before she could react, the dynamic shifted at dizzying speed. He leaned into her ear, his voice dripping with dangerous allure. "Now that we're sharing a bed, what do you think we should do next?" Those words completely shattered Haley's composure, leaving her frozen stiff. Seeing her reaction, Ferris let out a soft chuckle. He clarified that he was merely teasing her. Yet just as Haley breathed a sigh of relief, Ferris's tone abruptly flipped completely, turning dead serious. "To be honest, I'm not joking at all." His words were both a subtle test and a graceful retreat he deliberately left open for her. He reassured her, "If you want to refuse, don't feel pressured." Ferris had placed the entire decision squarely in her hands. Strangely enough, a flicker of desire stirred in Haley's mind. In truth, she actually wanted to give it a try. Yet the words hovered on the tip of her tongue, unable to spill out as she found herself lost in a whirlwind of tangled emotions. Ferris watched her in silence, assuming Haley wasn't ready to embrace any of this just yet. After all, Haley had once been willing to throw her very life away for another man. He was suddenly reminded of the upcoming royal hunt and the name that would appear there. The man Haley had supposedly loved so deeply. Lawrence Irvine. That was a name Ferris knew all too well. He was Haley's former lover. Renowned as a brilliant prosecutor of the kingdom, Lauren indeed possessed considerable talent. In the past, Ferris hadn't cared about the man's existence, but now that they were married, things were entirely different. He decided to reopen the investigation dossier on Haley to examine it closely, as its contents were absurd beyond belief. The more he read, the more furious Ferris became, immediately summoning Jade to confront him. He roared that this entire report was utterly riddled with false information. Pointing straight at the note claiming she loved sweets, he bellowed in exasperation. Haley usually ate less than a kitten, lost her appetite if food was slightly rich, and grazed on plain greens all day long. He slammed the dossier violently onto the desk, enraged that if they fabricated facts right in plain sight, what value did this report have to be trusted? Ferris chewed Jade out relentlessly, demanding how he dared submit such trash full of glaring holes. He ordered the entire investigation scrapped and redone from scratch, flawless report before the royal hunt concluded, and it had to be precise. Once the room fell empty, Ferris leaned back against his chair. He questioned himself why he was getting so irritated over things concerning Haley. Was his intuition warning him that this woman still harbored countless unrevealed secrets? Amid his inner turmoil, word arrived that Haley had ditched her attendants and strolled off toward the lake alone. Unable to sit still, he immediately gave orders to Jade. "Keep your eyes glued to Haley at all costs. If she loses so much as a single strand of hair, everyone will pay dearly." A few days slipped by and Haley sat dazed in the garden, gazing blankly into empty space. Her mind was clearly nowhere near the scenery before her eyes. While she was lost in thought, Arthur seemed to pop up from the ground right behind her with a sly smirk. Staring so intently at what? Haley gasped, scared out of her wits, and yelled in annoyance. "Why do you always pop in and out like a ghost?" She complained that she had been searching for him for days while he vanished without a trace. Arthur shrugged nonchalantly, clicking his tongue. "I'm not the kind of man you can just run into anywhere." His arrogant demeanor made Haley sick, but since she needed his help, she had to grit her teeth and swallow her pride. Arthur leaned close to her face, asking curiously, What's so urgent that you're looking for me? Only then did Haley state her request plainly. She wanted Arthur to secretly escort Ferris at the royal hunt. Arthur had no interest without a reward, demanding what was in it for him. So cornered, Haley went all in, agreeing to any terms as long as it didn't cost her life. That statement inadvertently gave Arthur an opportunity to press her. Turns out your love for him isn't so grand that you'd sacrifice your life after all, huh? Haley froze. This had nothing to do with whether she loved him or not, yet Arthur kept pushing. If it wasn't love, what on earth did that affection mean in her eyes? Haley was still wondering whether Arthur was suddenly acting out of compassion to offer help. To her surprise, Arthur burst into raucous laughter upon hearing that, scoffing at how ridiculous it sounded. He acted completely detached, saying there was nothing in this world he cared about right now. Just as Haley breathed a sigh of relief, Arthur leaned in closer, his tone turning teasingly suggestive. Staring intently at her, he asked mockingly, "Want to experience some thrills with me?" He even brought up the past, whispering, "Be a good girl, and I'll make all your darkest fantasies come true." That remark made Haley explode. She shrieked in total denial, insisting she never harbored such degenerate thoughts and declaring she was completely immune to spirits. Arthur refused to let her off, landing another fatal verbal strike. "Aren't you into younger men?" At this point, Haley's last line of defense collapsed entirely, and she roared like a lioness, cursing him as a shameless phantom. Arthur didn't care in the slightest, laughing even more heartily. After a moment of silence, she asked point-blank, "Were you being serious about that condition earlier?" Arthur reverted to his flirtatious teasing, asking if she was really that impatient. "Just a moment ago you were denying it with your whole life." Haley stamped her feet in a fluster, frantically clarifying that she only wanted to confirm and had zero intention of doing anything improper. But Arthur merely offered a smirk, a smile that sent chills running down Haley's spine. Then he abruptly dropped all playfulness, switching to an unusually stern tone. He said the bond between mortals is far more wondrous than imagined, and being with the one you love brings meaning and joy that only humans are blessed to experience. Starting to lecture me now, huh? He advised Haley not to waste her time dwelling on the spirit realm and to enjoy her radiant youth instead. Haley felt utterly aggrieved inside. The guy standing before her wasn't even someone she loved. What right did a phantom have to stand here preaching morality? And a rookie spirit at that, showing no respect whatsoever. Before she could talk back, Arthur delivered his cold verdict. He washed his hands of this matter. Before Haley could grasp what was happening, her forehead took a sharp flick out of nowhere. Arthur growled, "A mere mortal daring to make a pact with spirits must be out of her mind." His gaze turned razor-sharp, warning Haley that playing this game could ruin her whole life. If a truly powerful evil spirit resided in this castle, she would have been torn to shreds long ago without a single bone left. Haley knew Arthur wasn't wrong, but she had no way out now. Relying on her puny strength alone, how could she possibly turn the tides? To avoid raising alarms, she had considered secretly embroidering talisman charms into handkerchiefs. But unfortunately, that method was ineffective. Such childish tricks couldn't save anyone's life. With the slow and steady plan ruined, Haley went all out. Though utterly drained, she decided to overwhelm with quantity over quality. If one talisman didn't work, she'd make 100. The little ghost beside her gaped in astonishment, asking if she was some enlightened master in hiding. Haley offered a bitter smile. What enlightened master? In the past, she had merely been a pawn in someone else's hands. To cling to a sliver of hope, she had buried her head in work night and day, pouring all her prayers into every single talisman. Even if exhausted, even if she had to pray thousands of times, she was determined to snatch a life back from the Grim Reaper. But all by herself, she had no certainty of victory in protecting Ferris. Haley erupted, unleashing a torrent of resentment into the empty air, reproaching that useless guardian spirit. Emotions pouring out, she cried, "I hate this whole thing the most!" She lashed out, calling him an utterly bothersome nuisance. Who would have thought those words would poke a hornet's nest? Arthur, who seemed to have vanished, materialized right in front of her again. He gave a faint smirk, probing, "Do you truly find me that annoying, Kang Yi-jae?" She turned pale, flipping her tone instantly as she stammered, "I was just joking." Arthur's silhouette began to fade, dissolving into glittering blue motes of light. Before leaving, he made sure to throw in a parting reminder for her to properly enjoy her life. With that, he vanished completely, not even bothering to leave a proper goodbye. Haley sat dazed on the grass, silently cursing. What kind of romantic melodrama garbage did he just spew? Daring to play handsy and then vanish, he was a true rogue phantom. calling himself a guardian spirit, yet useless in the heat of danger. Time was running out as the royal hunt drew near. Even if the talisman-embroidered handkerchief lacked potency, she still had to grit her teeth and finish it. It was her only beacon of hope right now. Suddenly, Haley's body went on strike as dizziness rushed in, making the world spin around her. Days of exhausting toil had completely drained her vitality. She had told herself to push just a little harder, but her body surrendered first. She was really done for this time, bringing trouble upon herself by forbidding the maids from tailing behind her. Collapsing in the middle of nowhere like this, her cries would reach neither heaven nor earth. Her vision blurred as she slumped onto the grassy lawn, her consciousness plunging into an endless abyss. Ferris was fuming, barking whether she was deliberately doing this as a protest strike against him. Haley weakly defended herself, swearing she hadn't done it on purpose and found the whole ordeal utterly humiliating. Fortunately, Jade had discovered her and brought her back, or she couldn't wash away the blame even if she jumped into the Yellow River. She timidly probed, wondering if her father had caused some catastrophic trouble again. She even apologized on behalf of her family. He lowered his voice and gently asked, "Are you still in pain?" Even as Haley insisted she was fine, the ambiguous atmosphere inadvertently nudged their relationship down a new path. Putting on a stern face, Ferris forbade her from squirming, grumbling that she had only been in the palace for a few days yet fainted all the time. Haley gave a sheepish smile, half joking. "Whenever your majesty blows up, I'm the one who catches the fallout." That joke was like adding fuel to the fire, sending Ferris into a fluster to deny it. He explained that he wasn't playing around. He was genuinely furious at her total disregard for her own health. By reflex, Haley opened her mouth to apologize again, thinking she had caused trouble. Little did she know that her apology only aggravated Ferris further. He hung his head in prolonged silence before finally pouring out his innermost thoughts. He had been convinced Haley loathed this marriage to her bones, yet she spoke candidly. She didn't reject the marriage, viewing it simply as an arrangement of destiny. Ferris didn't let up, pressing, "Is it because you hate me as a person?" But without a second's hesitation, Haley brushed that thought aside immediately. Suspicious, Ferris asked if she even knew his name. Haley replied, "Who in this entire kingdom wouldn't know?" Ferris coaxed her to say his name. Haley articulated clearly, "Riderick Ferris Blake." Suddenly, she felt terribly self-conscious. Ferris complained that she knew it so well, yet had never spoken his name once. He suggested that when they were alone, she could call him by name or use a nickname. This dizzying change took Haley completely by surprise. She grabbed the blanket, pulling it over her head to hide inside. Ferris's eyes widened in disbelief as he asked, "What on earth are you doing now?" A muffled grunt came from beneath the blanket. "We need to keep our distance. The closer we get, the more compelled I feel to help you." Ferris was beside himself with exasperation, utterly unable to digest this woman's bizarre logic. He scoffed sarcastically. "Does the Duncan family pass down a secret manual on how to choke people with a single sentence?" Haley giggled, finding the sarcasm surprisingly charming, as their shyness melted away to make room for the young couple's daily bickering. Only now did Ferris truly realize he had fallen completely into the snare of love. Whenever Haley strayed even half a step from him, an indescribable irritation flared up in his chest. Yet the moment he caught sight of her smile, all that frustration evaporated into thin air. Gazing intently at her, he smirked and asked, "Are you a red fox sent from the deep woods to bewitch men?" To his disbelief, Haley didn't sense the jealousy behind it at all, mistaking it for a compliment. She innocently began lecturing him, explaining that for a vixen to wrap a man around her finger was a sophisticated craft with a near-zero failure rate. Ferris was utterly defeated. He was clearly expressing his grievances, yet this woman's brain managed to translate it into praise for her professional expertise. As the royal hunt drew near, Haley lay in bed, unable to quell the anxiety in her heart. She probed carefully. "Is participation mandatory for this event? Is there any way I can bow out?" Ferris answered casually, assuming she had another bout of pity for small animals and simply didn't want to kill. He instructed her that while he was away, she must never touch blades and must stay far away from lakes and ponds. But little did he know, Haley's worries had nothing to do with those small creatures. The guardian spirit she had asked for help had vanished without a trace, and the talismans she prepared couldn't even be used. What would happen if the horrific tragedy of the past repeated itself? Watching over her beside the bed, Ferris called out Haley's name anxiously, fearing something was wrong. Her next words nearly stopped his heart cold. She made a chillingly serious proposal. If you break an arm right now, could you skip the royal hunt? Ferris's eyes went wide, his mind freezing completely. Before he could even digest that horrifying remark, Haley added another cold inquiry. Or do you need to break a leg as well to make it convincing? Ferris let out a bitter, mocking laugh. Did that frail, skinny frame of hers really think it could take on a burly man like him? But Haley's response shattered any lingering optimism he had. Of course I can't do it myself, but I can ask Jade to help me. Ferris couldn't believe the insane suggestions she was making were completely serious. This woman's thought process truly followed no conventional logic whatsoever. Haley muttered to herself, deeply skeptical whether a flimsy handkerchief was powerful enough to save a life. Curious, Ferris pressed her. So in the end, do you actually plan on giving me that handkerchief? Haley took offense. Do I look like some habitual fraud to you? Yet Ferris lowered his gaze, his expression filled with hesitation. Because beside Haley, there always lingered the phantom named Lawrence. Whenever he thought of that name, his chest tightened with unbearable frustration. That nameless, prickly resentment made everything he looked at feel irritating. As for Haley, she was walking right into her own trap. She was convinced the handkerchief was worthless, unable to even scare away a ghost. Why on earth did Ferris treat it like a priceless treasure? Standing beside her, Ferris grew increasingly irritated. He was convinced she was putting on a gloomy act, making up excuse after excuse just to avoid giving him the handkerchief. His nameless fury boiled over, and unable to hold back any longer, he reached out and ruffled Haley's hair into a mess as she squirmed and shrieked, dodging his grip. That's not it at all! But Ferris ignored her, determined to engrave one truth deep into her mind. A promise made must be kept. Going back on her word? Not a chance. At this point, Haley began digging up old scores to settle. She brought up what happened during the previous hunt. Ferris was the one who had asked for her help first. To her dismay, Ferris instantly fired back, mocking her tiny stature as being as small as a bean. Haley stamped her feet in indignation, scolding Ferris for being arrogant and hulking like a giant guardian deity. Ferris helplessly waved the white flag in defeat, groaning that this verbal brawl was dealing too much critical damage. Joking aside, though, in the end, Haley softened and agreed to give him the handkerchief. She told him to drop his suspicious habits from now on. This time, Ferris fell completely silent, merely watching her hand movements with an unusually tender gaze. Now it was Haley's turn to freeze, at a loss as to what his expression meant. Ferris wasn't just suspicious about the handkerchief. He sensed that Haley was hiding countless secrets from him, to the point where he didn't even dare trust the investigation report in his hands anymore. There were things he could turn a blind eye to, but once trust was cracked, it was difficult to repair in his eyes. If Haley intended to put on an act, she should see it through to the end. Yet she showed far too many glaring flaws, making it hard for him to play dumb even if he wanted to. Feeling exposed, Haley bristled like a porcupine and sprang up like a coiled spring, shouting that she hadn't lied at all. That fierce reaction startled Ferris, making him wonder if this woman could actually read minds. To prove her innocence, Haley pointed to the side for him to see clearly. She swore that she had genuinely embroidered those handkerchiefs with her own hands and wasn't making things up. Following her finger, Ferris stood rooted to the spot. The thick stack of handkerchiefs there was absurdly massive in quantity. An indescribable feeling surged within him. He had thought Haley was cold and aloof, never expecting her to be so hardworking behind the scenes. Yet who on earth were all these handkerchiefs prepared for? Taking a closer look, the patterns embroidered on the handkerchiefs were truly beyond words. This bizarre aesthetic left Ferris completely dumbfounded for quite some time. Yet Haley looked utterly thrilled, even eager to embroider a few more. Initially, Ferris had only intended to take a handkerchief she had used before, never expecting her to go to such extremes. Until his gaze fell upon Haley's hands, covered in needle pricks and wounds, and he fell silent. It turned out that to create all of these, she had endured so much pain. The defensive walls in Ferris's heart crumbled completely. As long as she could keep that radiant smile, nothing else seemed to matter anymore. He urged Haley to close her eyes and rest, even sulkily declaring that even if she gave this entire pile of handkerchiefs to someone else, he wouldn't say a single word. Ferris's tone was so dripping with sour jealousy that it was almost unbearable. Yet this unwarranted possessiveness seemed rather endearing in Haley's eyes. In truth, that gift had been meant for him all along, but since he loved jumping to wild conclusions, she'd let him wait a few more days to teach him a lesson. Right at that moment, Ferris blurted out, "Do you want to rest your head on my arm to sleep?" The offer caught Haley completely off guard. After all, they were now husband and wife in the eyes of the law, so a little intimacy was only natural, yet lying down right next to each other still made Haley flustered. Ferris made an excuse about poor blood circulation in his arm to coax her closer. Though half skeptical, Haley obediently scooted closer. This distance was truly far too close for her, so she barely dared to move a muscle. Ferris was secretly celebrating inside, realizing this girl truly didn't have a shred of experience. Seeing her cower like that, Ferris took the opportunity to tease her further. Backed into a corner, Haley resorted to intimidation. "If I lose my temper, it gets really terrifying." Who would have thought that what she called losing her temper was merely a loud, screaming tantrum? Ferris burst into hearty laughter, instantly dispelling the suffocating tension. Seeing him laugh so merrily, Haley was left utterly baffled. Could such an absurd threat actually have worked? Haley's attempt at intimidation was truly a textbook comedic disaster. She had intended to scare him pale with a menacing threat, only to make Ferris laugh so hard he lost all composure. Watching her clumsy, flustered demeanor, Ferris finally saw through the truth. She simply didn't know how to be truly angry. Whenever trouble arose, her instinctive reaction was always to retreat into defensive mode. Her habitual posture of being poised to flee at any moment suddenly caused the atmosphere to sink into somber silence. In Ferris's eyes, Haley's figure before him exuded a heartbreaking loneliness, a vulnerability that made him unable to resist reaching out to hold on to her. Gathering Haley's petite frame into his embrace, Ferris felt an indescribable ache swell within his chest. He even wondered if her irresponsible father had molded her into someone so fragile that one hardly knew how to cherish her gently enough. This close proximity left Haley completely flustered. Before she could even process this unfamiliar sensation, Ferris dropped a piercing question. He asked bluntly why every time she gazed out at the lake, her eyes looked like someone seeking death. In truth, Haley had the answer in her heart. It was because of him. But she wouldn't dare utter it even if lent 10 times the courage. She had no choice but to deflect, asking if he would truly be willing to help solve her troubles if she faced any. Without hesitating for even half a second, Ferris gave a firm, resolute nod. Still unable to contain her curiosity, Haley pressed on. "Why on earth are you so good to me?" In response, Ferris wrapped her tightly in his arms and offered an undeniable reason. "Because you are my wife." Those few short words left Haley frozen in place. She had always thought he reached out to save her merely out of pity upon witnessing her miserable state. This marriage had clearly been forced from the start, so why was he being so tender now? That effortless care and undeniable touch made Haley's lips protest, but her heart had completely surrendered. The feeling of someone caring about her was something Haley had never dared dream of in her entire life. Even knowing this might only be a fleeting illusion, she did not want to wake up. No matter how high a price she might have to pay in the future, she was willing. Because the warmth Ferris gave her was something she had never experienced before. It seemed the culprit behind her utter turmoil was undeniably His Majesty the King himself. Once this reliance began, there would be no turning back for her. Haley finally admitted that the current man made it impossible for her to look away. If she didn't want to answer, then they might as well go to sleep early. After all, sleeping plenty was the only way to grow up quickly. Haley mumbled in protest that she wasn't short, even cheekily asking if he planned to be her body pillow forever. Who knew Ferris would outplay her, replying that serving as her blanket would be fine too. Haley complained that he was too heavy, so Ferris could only chuckle helplessly, telling her to stop being so picky and close her eyes to sleep. Only then did Haley realize he truly wasn't forcing her to give an answer anymore. Haley's goodnight wish was so sweet it melted the listener's heart. Ferris gently caressed her hair, wishing her sweet dreams. This woman was driving him crazy. This feeling of losing control made it impossible for him to stay calm. Time flew by, and before long, the day of the royal hunting competition arrived. The scale of this event was no joke, with tents and carriages stretching across the grounds. Looking at the vast sea of people before her, Haley couldn't help but marvel, noting that even His Majesty looked busy out of his mind. This grand event was truly anything but simple. Deborah finally finished dressing her, and admiring her gorgeous appearance, the maid insisted that with just one glance from the king, he would surely take first place. But deep down, Haley thought otherwise. What was so great about winning first place? She despised these blood-soaked slaughter games, even secretly wishing His Majesty would come in dead last so she wouldn't have to clean up the mess afterward. Grumbling as she might, she hadn't left behind a single piece of her spiritual gear. These 3 handkerchiefs were precious artifacts infused with all her spiritual energy. She originally planned to bring more, but Deborah had desperately talked her out of it. Now that she was ready, she went out to see the hunting party off before returning to the castle to rest once the contest began. Outside, the atmosphere was already buzzing, cheers echoing all around as everyone eagerly anticipated the queen's appearance. Mounted on his steed, Ferris listened to the noisy commotion, yet his heart remained unusually serene. Right at that moment, a familiar figure appeared. Lawrence Irvine stood at a distance, murmuring Haley's name under his breath. Meanwhile, Haley was lifting her skirts and hurrying along, her mind solely focused on finding the king with no attention to spare for anything else. Presenting the prepared handkerchiefs, she told him they were protective charms she had specially prepared for him, not only to ward off evil spirits but also to bless him with victory, and furthermore, they were all for him. Ferris was visibly caught off guard, asking if all of these were truly for him. Haley beamed brightly and countered, "If not you, then who else? Isn't my husband standing right here before me?" That single sentence struck Ferris right in the heart. He cursed inwardly, thinking this woman was as sly as a fox, knowing exactly how to flirt. Haley gifted a whole 3-year quota in one go, opting for quantity over restraint, while Ferris didn't complain at all, happily caressing them nonstop after receiving them. Seeing him treasure them like fragile jewels, Haley thought this man actually had quite an endearing side. Likely receiving this kind of gift for the first time, he looked a bit bashful. Ferris suddenly asked what return gift she would like. Haley waved her hand, saying she lacked nothing and had no interest in some trivial hunted prey. This displeased Ferris, who countered that returning empty-handed to one's wife after a hunt was out of the question. Now it was Haley's turn to freeze. This guy was using her own words from earlier against her. Looking at the bustling scene around them, Haley understood full well that everyone had their own hidden schemes. Naturally, she wanted Ferris to win, but she was even more afraid he might risk his life for mere pride. Under current circumstances, safety came first. She intended to advise him to know his limits, but feared saying so would wound his pride. Seeing her hesitate with unsaid words, Ferris pressed to know what she truly wanted. Haley paused in silence for a moment before deciding to rephrase. She said, "Since you sit upon that throne, you must have a reason you have to win. I don't understand those matters. I only wish for you to return safely." Those words left Ferris completely speechless. He stared at Haley for a long time, endlessly wondering what on earth was going on inside this woman's head. Who could have anticipated that at this very tense moment, that man, Lawrence, would suddenly appear? The atmosphere instantly froze solid. Ferris immediately sensed something was amiss. The surrounding crowd began to whisper and gossip. Haley stood frozen to the spot. Long-buried memories suddenly breached the dam, flooding back wildly. They were all intimate images between her original self and him. Standing under broad daylight like this, if she couldn't control her emotions, everything would go down the drain. Haley screamed in her heart to stop. If rumors spread that the queen lost her composure over an old flame, where would royal dignity stand, and Ferris's position would become exceedingly precarious. At that critical juncture, Ferris took long strides forward, sweeping Haley into his arms to shield her and forcing her to look straight into his eyes. Haley's mind was now filled entirely with self-blame. Convinced she had made an unforgivable mistake that would surely bring enormous trouble upon Ferris, she could only frantically apologize. Ferris looked at her panic-stricken state and thought to himself, it wasn't some heinous crime. Was there any need to jump at shadows like this? He gently comforted Haley, saying that at most only 13 people had seen, and besides, he had shielded her quickly, so she did great. Haley was stunned upon hearing that. 13 people seeing it was considered fine? This man's way of comforting truly left her speechless, though thankfully the situation was temporarily under control. The onlookers around could only engage in wild speculation. Seeing Haley finally smile, the heavy stone weighing on Ferris's heart was finally lifted. He handed his lavish cloak directly to Haley to use the expensive fabric as a tissue for her tears, not forgetting to tease, "Wiping tears is fine, but don't you dare wipe your snot on it." Lauren watched this scene from afar, undoubtedly feeling a bitter pang in his heart. The surrounding crowd continued to gossip and fawn, marveling at how deeply in love the royal couple was, already inseparable before even parting. Ferris reminded Haley she could lift her head now, telling her to pretend nothing happened and maintain a proper royal smile. Haley looked at the man before her, realizing that despite his sharp tongue, he was an unshakable pillar of support in times of crisis. A thought suddenly crossed her mind. Marrying this guy might just be the best decision of her life. Seeing her in high enough spirits to tease, Ferris knew she had completely regained her composure. Haley murmured an apology once more, blaming herself for being so impulsive earlier. Ferris grumbled that she talked too much, yet his eyes were overflowing with patience. While Haley was still hesitating, Ferris had already planned his next move. Flashing a sly smirk, he softly called Haley's name, suggesting that if people loved gossiping, why not give them a truly spectacular show? This move was truly the ultimate masterstroke. Haley stood frozen, completely unable to keep up with his pace, having no idea what trick he was about to pull. With a nonchalant expression, Ferris talked nonsense, claiming he would take responsibility for cleaning up all previous troubles. But today, Haley also had to share some responsibility, so she had to cooperate seamlessly with his next action. Haley knew full well he was making up an excuse, yet looking at his solemn face, she somehow couldn't bring herself to refuse. Ferris smirked softly and right in the middle of the crowd boldly planted a passionate kiss upon her lips. And just like that, the entire crowd's attention was completely diverted. Ferris's move was rather bold, leading even himself to secretly wonder if he had overacted a bit. He subtly checked her reaction, only to find that far from pulling away, Haley actually reached out and gripped his lapel tightly. That clutch of his robe gave Ferris absolute certainty of his victory. Since Haley was cooperating so enthusiastically, this performance had to be played to absolute perfection. Smirking triumphantly, he seized the momentum, pulling Haley into a deep embrace and giving her the most passionate kiss under countless watching eyes. Just seconds ago, Ferris had made excuses that the kiss was merely a pretense. Yet now, looking straight into Haley's eyes, he confessed that he simply wanted to do it. That confession left Haley stunned for quite a while. Before she could recover her senses, Ferris was ready to depart. Before leaving, he did not forget to remind her to be careful on her way back. Watching his retreating figure, Haley suddenly understood everything. What pretense? What excuse? In truth, he was using this gesture to protect her. This unconditional favoritism made it impossible for Haley to remain idle any longer. She called out loudly toward his retreating silhouette. This time, her defenses completely crumbled, her heart overflowing with guilt and gratitude. She realized her feelings for Ferris had grown so profound there was no turning back. Haley stepped up to stop Ferris and without a word shoved the spirit bead bracelet she carried right into his hand. Looking at the item in his palm, Ferris felt dizzy from her overwhelming tenderness. He teased that she was too silly. Why give away her most precious possession to someone else? But Haley made a demand. He had to return alive and personally fasten it back onto her wrist. This was no mere gift. It was clearly giving him an undeniable reason to return safe and sound. In truth, Haley hadn't thought so deeply. She just wanted to do a little more for him before the moment of parting. Ferris smiled as he accepted the prayer beads. Holding this in his hand, he now carried one more cherished tether in his heart. Looking at Haley before him, a reckless thought flashed through his mind. He genuinely wanted to kiss her once more, but reason reminded him that it was time to depart. Leaving behind his final farewell, he leapt onto his horse and galloped off like the wind without looking back once. Leaving only Haley standing alone beneath the open sky, fervently praying that as long as he returned safely, she would gladly pay any price. Right at that moment, the spirit beads in Ferris's hand suddenly began to glow. This seemingly ordinary string of beads appeared to truly resonate with her heartfelt prayers.